Think about the last time you opened a history book or watched a documentary on ancient civilizations. We like to believe we have a solid grasp on our past, that the stories we've been told are complete, reliable, even final. But what if I told you that some of the most pivotal moments in human history aren't what they seem? That beneath the surface of accepted narratives lie secrets deliberately buried, accidentally lost, or quietly erased, waiting to rewrite everything we thought we knew. Imagine standing in a dusty excavation site, your hands brushing away centuries of soil to reveal an object that doesn't belong, a tool too advanced for its time, a document contradicting official records, a city where there should be none. These aren't just curiosities, they are seismic disruptions in our understanding of who we are and where we come from. Each one of these discoveries has, at some point, forced historians to pause, reconsider, and often rewrite entire chapters of our shared story. From hidden manuscripts that challenge religious dogma to archaeological finds that upend cultural timelines, these revelations don't just add footnotes, they redefine reality. In this video, we're going to explore 30 times history was altered by a secret discovery. We'll travel across continents and through millennia, uncovering truths that were meant to stay hidden. You'll witness how a single artifact can dismantle long-held beliefs, how a coded message can change the course of wars, and how a forgotten tomb can illuminate the lives of people history tried to erase. This isn't just a list of interesting finds, it's a journey into the heart of human curiosity, persistence, and the undeniable thrill of the hunt. So settle in, open your mind, and prepare to see the past in a whole new light. Our journey begins not in a library or an archive, but at the bottom of the sea off the coast of a tiny Greek island. In the year 1901, sponge divers, braving the depths near the island of Antikythera, stumbled upon the decaying wreck of a Roman cargo ship. Among the corroded bronze statues and shattered ceramics, they recovered what appeared to be a lump of rock, crusted over and seemingly insignificant. It was set aside with other less glamorous finds, just another piece of debris from a 2,000-year-old shipwreck. For decades, it sat in a museum storage room, a forgotten curiosity. But this unassuming lump of rock and bronze held a secret that would utterly shatter our perception of ancient technological capability. It wasn't until the 1950s that a curious scientist, Derek J. de Sola Price, took a closer look. Using the emerging technology of gamma-ray imaging, he peered inside the crusty exterior. What he saw was nothing short of miraculous. Beneath the layers of calcification was not a rock, but the most sophisticated mechanical device the ancient world had ever produced. The Antikythera Mechanism, as it came to be known, was an intricate clockwork computer made of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, all precisely hand-cut and mounted within a wooden frame about the size of a shoebox. Its front and back were covered with finely inscribed dials and pointers, a complex interface for understanding the cosmos. This wasn't just a simple calendar. The mechanism could predict solar and lunar eclipses with stunning accuracy, track the cycles of the ancient Olympic Games, and model the irregular orbit of the moon. It could show the positions of the sun, moon, and likely the 5 known planets against the backdrop of the zodiac. It was, in essence, a portable, hand-cranked planetarium of breathtaking complexity. The sheer precision of its gearing system, including a differential gear, a technology previously believed to have been invented in the 16th century, was a physical impossibility according to everything we thought we knew about Hellenistic engineering. This one device single-handedly forced a complete rewrite of the history of technology. It proved that the ancient Greeks didn't just philosophize about the heavens, they built machines to simulate them, possessing a level of scientific insight and mechanical genius we assumed was millennia away. The Antikythera Mechanism stands as a stark, beautiful reminder that our ancestors were far more advanced than we often give them credit for. Moving from the depths of the Aegean Sea, our next discovery takes us to the arid, sun-scorched cliffs of the Judean desert. It was the spring of 1947, a time when the world was still rebuilding from a global war. A young Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Ed-Dihib was searching for a lost goat near the ancient settlement of Qumran. Hoping to lure the animal out, he tossed a rock into a small opening in the cliff face. Instead of hearing the familiar scuffle of hooves, he was met with the sound of shattering pottery. Curious, he climbed inside and found himself in a dark, narrow cave. There, nestled in tall, cylindrical jars, were what he initially thought were just old rolls of leather. He had just stumbled upon the first of what would become known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, a collection of ancient manuscripts that would fundamentally recalibrate our understanding of the biblical world. These were not just simple parchments. The initial discovery sparked a decade-long search of 11 caves in the area, ultimately yielding over 900 manuscripts and thousands of fragments. The scrolls contained a breathtaking array of texts, written primarily in Hebrew and Aramaic on leather and papyrus, and they dated from the 3rd century before the Common Era to the 1st century of the Common Era. This placed their creation squarely within the tumultuous Second Temple period of Judaism, a time of immense religious and political ferment. The contents were a library frozen in time, comprising 3 main categories: copies of the books of the Hebrew Bible, previously unknown sectarian writings that outline the rules and beliefs of a devout Jewish community, likely the Essenes, and fascinating apocalyptic texts. For scholars of religion and history, the impact was nothing short of revolutionary. Before the scrolls were found, the oldest complete Hebrew manuscripts of the Bible, like the Aleppo Codex, were from the Middle Ages. The Dead Sea Scrolls pushed that timeline back by 1,000 years. When experts compared the biblical texts from Qumran to the medieval versions, they discovered an astonishing level of accuracy in the textual transmission over a millennium. This provided powerful, tangible evidence for the careful preservation of these sacred writings. Yet, there were also subtle differences and variant readings that opened new windows into how the biblical text evolved before it was standardized. Perhaps even more transformative were the non-biblical texts like the Community Rule and the War Scroll. These writings revealed a deeply devout and apocalyptic Jewish sect living in isolation at Qumran, awaiting a final, cosmic war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. This discovery shattered the old notion of a monolithic Judaism in the time of Jesus. Instead, it revealed a landscape rich with diversity, featuring Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and other groups, all interpreting their faith in different ways. This context is crucial for understanding the environment in which Christianity first emerged. Many of the ideas, phrases, and theological concepts found in the New Testament, once thought to be entirely unique, now appeared to have parallels in this broader Jewish world. The scrolls didn't diminish Christianity's origins, but rather grounded them firmly within the vibrant and complex tapestry of Second Temple Judaism. They proved that the roots of both modern Judaism and early Christianity are deeply intertwined in a soil far richer and more complex than we had ever imagined. From the sacred texts of the desert, we now travel to the banks of the Nile, where a different kind of key was waiting to be found. This discovery didn't contain spiritual revelations. Instead, it held the linguistic code to an entire civilization. In July 1799, during Napoleon Bonaparte's military campaign in Egypt, French soldiers were reinforcing the defenses of a fort near the town of Rosetta, now known as Rashid. While digging trenches, Lieutenant Pierre-François Bouchard made a remarkable find: a large, dark slab of granodiorite stone, about 45 inches high and 30 inches wide, covered in etched writing. This was the Rosetta Stone. What made this particular slab so extraordinary were the 3 distinct scripts carved into its surface. The top section featured the elegant pictorial writing of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. The middle portion was written in Demotic, a cursive script used for everyday documents in later periods of ancient Egypt. Crucially, the bottom third was inscribed in ancient Greek, a language well known to European scholars. The text, a decree issued by priests in Memphis in 196 before the Common Era to honor Pharaoh Ptolemy V, was the same in all three scripts. Instantly, the officers and scholars accompanying Napoleon's expedition recognized its immense potential. Here, at last, was a direct parallel text, a linguistic bridge that could finally crack the code of hieroglyphs, a writing system that had been utterly indecipherable for nearly 1,500 years. The stone itself became a prize of war. When the British defeated the French in Egypt in 1801, they claimed the artifact under the terms of the capitulation of Alexandria. It was shipped to England and presented to King George III, who subsequently donated it to the British Museum, where it has resided ever since. But the real battle, the intellectual one, was just beginning. Scholars across Europe obtained copies of the inscriptions and began the painstaking work of attempting to use the known Greek text to unlock the unknown Egyptian ones. Progress was initially slow. Many thought hieroglyphs were purely symbolic, with each picture representing a whole idea or concept. A major breakthrough came from the English physicist Thomas Young, who correctly identified that the Demotic script was derived from hieroglyphs and that the oval rings or cartouches in the hieroglyphic section contained the phonetic spelling of royal names like Ptolemy. However, it was the brilliant French linguist Jean-François Champollion who ultimately achieved the full decipherment. A prodigy with a deep passion for ancient languages, Champollion immersed himself in the challenge. He secured a superior copy of the inscriptions and, building on Young's work, focused on the cartouches. Using the Greek text, he knew the name Ptolemy was in one cartouche. He then obtained an inscription from another obelisk that contained a cartouche with the names Cleopatra and Ptolemy. By comparing the two, he was able to match hieroglyphic characters to phonetic sounds, confirming that hieroglyphs were not just symbolic but were a complex mix of phonetic signs, logograms, and determinatives. In 1822, he published his famous Letter M. Dacier, outlining his system. The final proof came when he successfully applied his phonetic alphabet to cartouches containing the names of other rulers like Rameses and Thutmose, names that were not on the Rosetta Stone itself. His system worked universally. The impact of this decipherment cannot be overstated. It was as if a vast, silent library had suddenly been thrown open, its books now readable. The Rosetta Stone was the master key that unlocked the entire written record of ancient Egypt. For the first time in centuries, the voices of the pharaohs, priests, and people could be heard directly through their monumental inscriptions, religious texts, administrative papyri, and poetry. Egyptology was transformed overnight from a field of mere speculation and admiration of ruins into a rigorous historical science. We could now read accounts of great battles, understand complex religious beliefs like the Book of the Dead, and comprehend the intricacies of their economy and daily life. The stone didn't just translate words, it resurrected a civilization, granting us an unprecedented and intimate window into a world that had been lost to time. Leaving the sands of Egypt behind, we journey next to the fertile plains of China's Shaanxi province, where a chance dig for water would reveal one of the most awe-inspiring archaeological wonders of the modern world. For centuries, local farmers spoke of strange, hardened fragments of pottery and tales of underground spirits that would curse anyone who disturbed the earth. These whispers were treated as folklore until one day in March 1974, a group of farmers digging a well stumbled upon something far more substantial than a water source. Their shovels struck not wet soil, but the hardened clay shoulder of a life-sized human figure. At first, they feared they had uncovered an ancient burial ground, a terrible omen. As they carefully cleared more earth, they realized the truth was even more incredible. They had found a soldier standing in silent vigil for over 2 millennia. This single clay soldier was the first sentinel of a lost army. Word of the find reached archaeologists, and soon a full-scale excavation was underway. What they began to uncover defied all expectation. Row upon row of life-sized terracotta warriors began to emerge from the earth, each one unique, each one crafted with astonishing individual detail. There were not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands of them: infantrymen, archers, cavalrymen, and charioteers, all arranged in precise military formation as if waiting for the command to march into battle. This was the Terracotta Army, the silent guardians of the mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. The sheer scale of the discovery was, and still is, breathtaking. Current estimates suggest there are over 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots with 520 horses, and 150 cavalry horses, all fashioned from fired clay. But the army is only a fraction of the story. It is merely the protective outer element of a necropolis complex that is believed to span nearly 38 square miles. The main tomb mound, under which the emperor himself is believed to be buried, remains largely unexcavated, guarded by ancient booby traps, and according to the great historian Sima Qian, a map of the emperor's kingdom with rivers of flowing mercury. Modern scientific surveys have indeed detected unusually high concentrations of mercury in the soil there, lending chilling credibility to a 2,000-year-old account. The creation of this army was a logistical feat that reshaped our understanding of the Qin dynasty's power and organization. Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the man who conquered warring states to create a unified China, standardized currency, writing, and measurements, and began the early construction of what would become the Great Wall, was obsessed with one thing above all else: immortality. Fearing death and the vengeance of the spirits he had conquered in life, he commissioned this entire city of the dead to protect him and serve him in the afterlife. The project required the labor of hundreds of thousands of artisans and workers over nearly 4 decades. The figures were constructed using an assembly line process, with separate workshops building heads, limbs, torsos, and armor, which were then assembled and finished by master craftsmen who added personalized facial features, hairstyles, and expressions, ensuring no two warriors are exactly alike. They were even originally painted in vivid, lifelike colors, much of which flaked off upon exposure to air after burial. Beyond its staggering scale, the Terracotta Army fundamentally altered the historical narrative of the Qin dynasty. Previous accounts, largely written by the succeeding Han dynasty, who had every reason to vilify their predecessor, painted Qin Shi Huang as a brutal tyrant. While the massive conscripted labor for his project certainly caused immense suffering, the army reveals another side: an unparalleled commitment to artistry, organization, and imperial ambition. It provides a tangible, undeniable record of the military technology, armor, and tactics that enabled the Qin to conquer all of China. The discovery gave us a faces, quite literally thousands of them, to a period that was once only known through often biased texts. It proved that the first emperor's power was not merely a legend. It was a force so immense that he could command the creation of an entire subterranean world to carry his authority into eternity. This secret army, buried and forgotten, forced the world to completely re-evaluate the artistic ambition and terrifying efficiency of China's first emperor. But from the grand, unified army built to serve an emperor in death, we now turn to a discovery that is profoundly personal, utterly solitary, and perhaps forever unknowable. In the year 1912, a rare book dealer named Wilfred Voynich was on one of his many trips through Europe, scouring forgotten monasteries and ancient estates for valuable manuscripts. At the Villa Mondragon, a Jesuit college in Italy, he made the purchase of a lifetime: a thick, peculiar codex that would become the most mysterious book in the world. Its 240 vellum pages were filled from edge to edge with an elegant, flowing script unlike any language ever seen. It was accompanied by bizarre, beautiful, and sometimes unsettling illustrations of plants that don't exist, celestial charts of unknown constellations, and intricate diagrams of what appear to be biological or alchemical processes. This was the Voynich Manuscript, a puzzle that has defied every attempt at solution for over a century. The book itself is a physical artifact from the early 15th century, confirmed by carbon dating. We know it existed in the court of Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II of Germany, who apparently purchased it for 600 gold ducats, believing it to be the work of the 13th century English friar and alchemist Roger Bacon. Its history can be vaguely traced through various owners, including alchemists and scholars, before it vanished for centuries, only to resurface in Voynich's hands. But its origin, author, and most importantly, its meaning remain completely obscure. The text is written in a unique script, often called Voynichese, which appears to have between 20 and 30 distinct characters. It shows statistical patterns similar to a natural language. Words have a typical length. Certain characters appear more frequently at the beginnings of words, others at the ends, yet it matches no known tongue on earth. It is not a simple cipher of Latin, Hebrew, or Arabic. It is either an extraordinarily complex cipher, a constructed language, or a masterful hoax designed to baffle. This has led to a century of frenzied and fruitless attempts at decipherment. World War II codebreakers who famously cracked the German Enigma machine turned their skills to the Voynich and failed. Modern supercomputers and artificial intelligence have analyzed its patterns, only to produce gibberish or contradictory proposals. The theories about its content are as wild and varied as the illustrations themselves. Some believe it is a lost pharmacopoeia, detailing the medicinal properties of unknown New World plants. Others argue it is a treatise on medieval women's health, pointing to the many illustrations of nude female figures bathing in strange green pools connected by elaborate plumbing. There are theories that it represents a visual depiction of microscopic life, centuries before the invention of the microscope, or that it holds the secrets of alchemical transmutation. More fringe ideas suggest it is the work of aliens or visitors from a lost advanced civilization. The possibility that it is an elaborate hoax, perhaps created by Voynich himself or by a 16th century con artist like Edward Kelly to swindle the emperor, has always lingered. Yet the carbon dating to the early 1400s largely discredits Voynich as the creator, and the sheer consistency and complexity of the text across hundreds of pages suggest a monumental effort for a practical joke. The most compelling recent theory, proposed by historian Nicholas Gibbs, suggests it is a mostly plagiarized guide to women's health, written in a highly abbreviated Latin script, a sort of shorthand for common phrases used in such treatises. However, this theory, like all others, has been heavily criticized and lacks widespread acceptance. The true power of the Voynich manuscript lies not in what it says, but in what it represents, the humbling limits of our knowledge. For all our technological prowess and historical understanding, this book sits in a vault at Yale University, completely silent. It is a stark reminder that the past does not always willingly give up its secrets. It challenges the very core of the historian's mission to interpret, to contextualize, to understand. Here is an artifact that refuses all context, that resists all interpretation. It is a perfect void of meaning, forcing us to confront the possibility that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. In a world where we believe we can decode anything, the Voynich manuscript stands as a permanent and beautiful enigma. Yet even the most impenetrable puzzle can sometimes find its key, and our next discovery did just that, not through code breaking but through sheer, overwhelming volume. We move from a single, silent book to an entire lost library, one that gave voice to the very cradle of civilization itself. In the mid-19th century, the spotlight of archaeology shifted to the great mounds of Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These earthen hills, long thought to be natural features by local inhabitants, were in fact the buried ruins of magnificent ancient cities. Among the most ambitious excavators was a young English adventurer and diplomat named Austin Henry Layard. Digging at the site of Kuyunjik, which he believed to be the biblical city of Nineveh, Layard made a find that would dwarf all others: the royal library of Ashurbanipal, the last great king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. The discovery was not of gold or jewels, but of knowledge over 30,000 clay tablets and fragments, all inscribed with the intricate wedge-shaped script known as cuneiform. These tablets were not neatly arranged on shelves. The palace had been sacked and burned by invading Medes and Babylonians in 612 before the Common Era. The intense fire, while devastating, had ironically baked and preserved the clay tablets, making them far more durable than if they had simply been left to crumble. Layard and his assistant, Hormozd Rassam, shipped crate after crate of these fragile finds back to the British Museum, where the painstaking work of piecing them together began, a colossal jigsaw puzzle with an entire civilization's memory at stake. The man behind this collection was King Ashurbanipal, a unique ruler who prided himself not only on his military might but on his intellectual prowess. In one of his own inscriptions, he boasted, "I, Ashurbanipal, within the palace, understood the wisdom of Nabu, the god of writing. I have studied the hidden treasures of the art of writing. I have read the intricate tablets in Sumerian and Akkadian, and I have examined the inscriptions on stone from before the flood." His library was his greatest project, a deliberate effort to gather all the knowledge of his world. Scribes were sent across the empire to collect, copy, and translate texts from the ancient Sumerian and Babylonian cities, bringing them back to Nineveh to be stored in his great repository. Unlocking this treasure trove required another decipherment. Cuneiform itself was a mystery at the time, but the library provided the raw material needed to crack it. The key was the Behistun inscription, a massive cliffside text in Persia written in 3 cuneiform scripts: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. Using the known Old Persian as a Rosetta Stone-like guide, brilliant linguists like Henry Rawlinson and George Smith began the arduous task of deciphering the Babylonian dialect of Akkadian. It was George Smith, a self-taught engraver working at the British Museum, who made the most sensational find. In 1872, while sorting through the tablets from Nineveh, he came across a fragment that described a great flood, a ship resting on a mountain, and a dove being sent out to find dry land. He was so astounded he reportedly began to tear off his clothes in excitement. He had found a version of the flood story from the Epic of Gilgamesh, predating the biblical book of Genesis by centuries. This was the library's most profound gift, the Epic of Gilgamesh in its near-complete form. The poem tells the story of an arrogant king, Gilgamesh, his wild companion Enkidu, their heroic quests, and ultimately, Gilgamesh's desperate, futile search for immortality after Enkidu's death. It is a foundational work of world literature, exploring themes of friendship, loss, and the human acceptance of mortality with a depth and power that resonates just as strongly today. But the library held so much more than a single epic. It was a complete snapshot of a sophisticated intellectual world. There were treatises on medicine, detailing diagnoses and prescriptions. There were astronomical records that meticulously tracked the movements of planets and stars. There were legal codes, historical chronicles, and detailed administrative records that revealed the complex economy of the empire. Perhaps most fascinating are the everyday texts that offer a glimpse into the lives of ordinary people. There are omens derived from examining sheep livers, letters between merchants arguing over the price of copper, and even a hilarious dialogue known as The Poor Man of Nippur, a 3-part comedy about a man seeking revenge on a greedy mayor. The Library of Ashurbanipal did not just give us myths and king lists. It gave us the fears, hopes, jokes, and daily concerns of the people of Mesopotamia. It single-handedly dragged Assyrian culture out of the realm of biblical villainy and into the light as a complex, advanced, and deeply human civilization. Before its discovery, these societies were known largely through the sometimes hostile accounts of their enemies, like the Hebrews and Greeks. Now they could speak for themselves, and in doing so, they revealed that the roots of our own world, our literature, our science, our laws, and our very understanding of what it means to be human were planted in the fertile soil of Mesopotamia thousands of years ago. While the libraries of Assyria gave us the words of an empire, our next discovery offered a vision of unimaginable splendor, a glimpse into the material world of a pharaoh so complete it felt like stepping through a portal in time. For years, the Valley of the Kings was believed to be exhausted. Archaeologists had combed through the desert wadis for decades, convinced that every royal tomb from Egypt's New Kingdom had been found and plundered centuries, even millennia ago. One man, however, refused to give up, a stubborn, determined British Egyptologist named Howard Carter. Backed by his wealthy patron, Lord Carnarvon, Carter had been digging in the valley for years with little to show for it. By 1922, Carnarvon's patience and funds were running thin. He called Carter to England and told him the next season would be their last. Carter, utterly convinced that the tomb of the obscure boy King Tutankhamun was still waiting to be found, persuaded Carnarvon to fund one final, decisive season. Returning to Egypt, Carter made a strategic decision. He would clear down to the bedrock in a small, overlooked area near the entrance to the tomb of Ramesses VI. On November 4, 1922, his water boy stumbled upon a single step cut into the limestone. Feverish work revealed a staircase, then a doorway, all sealed with ancient necropolis stamps. Carter immediately sent a telegram to Carnarvon. "At last have made wonderful discovery in valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact, recovered same for your arrival, congratulations." Carnarvon rushed to Egypt, and on November 26, with Carnarvon, his daughter, and a few others present, Carter made a small hole in the sealed doorway. As he held a candle to the opening, Carnarvon anxiously asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter's now legendary reply was, "Yes, wonderful things." The flickering light illuminated a scene no living person had witnessed for over 3,000 years. The antechamber was packed to the ceiling with a chaotic jumble of exquisite objects, gilded couches in the shape of monstrous animals, alabaster vases, dismantled chariots glistening with gold, and a beautiful lotiform cup that seemed carved from a single block of crystal. It was a breathtaking, overwhelming chaos of treasure, but this was just the waiting room. The real secret lay behind another sealed, guarded doorway. It took months of meticulous cataloging to clear the antechamber before they could address that sealed door. In February of 1923, they broke through. This time, they found not just treasure, but the king himself. The innermost shrine contained a series of 4 gilded wooden sarcophagi, one nested within the other like the most precious Russian doll. Inside the final coffin, made of over 240 pounds of solid gold, lay the mummy of Tutankhamun, his head covered by the now iconic solid gold portrait mask, a masterpiece of serene and youthful beauty. The burial chamber was flanked by a treasury room containing the famous canopic shrine guarded by goddesses and a multitude of shabti figurines meant to serve the king in the afterlife. The sheer scale of the discovery was unprecedented. Over 5,000 objects were recovered from the 4 small rooms, each one a masterpiece of ancient craftsmanship. But its true value was not in the gold, immense as it was. It was in the pristine, undisturbed context. For the first time, archaeologists could see exactly how a pharaoh was buried, the order of the objects, the rituals involved, the sheer volume of goods deemed necessary for the journey to eternity. This was not a tomb reconstructed from fragments. It was a complete, frozen moment from the 18th dynasty. The find instantly ignited a global firestorm of Egyptomania. Art Deco designs began to feature lotus flowers and zigzag patterns. Women wore scarab beetle jewelry, and everything from furniture to fashion was influenced by the designs emerging from the valley. This fervor was only heightened by the sensationalistic press coverage of the so-called Curse of the Pharaohs, which began when Lord Carnarvon died from an infected mosquito bite just a few months after entering the tomb. Newspapers around the world ran wild with the story, inventing a mythical curse inscription and attributing any subsequent death to supernatural vengeance. While utterly fictional, the curse story captured the public's imagination and never truly let go, adding a layer of dark romance to the discovery. For scholars, however, the real magic was in the historical details the tomb revealed about this enigmatic king. Tutankhamun was not one of Egypt's great warrior pharaohs. He was a boy who inherited a throne in turmoil. He was likely the son of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, who had thrown Egypt into religious upheaval by abandoning the traditional pantheon of gods to worship a single deity, the Aten or sun disk. Tutankhamun's original name, Tutankhaten, meant living image of the Aten. The artifacts in his tomb tell the story of a country trying to restore its old order. His throne shows him and his queen under the rays of the Aten, a holdover from his father's reign. But his name was changed to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun, signaling a return to the worship of the state god Amun. His tomb was filled with traditional symbols and deities, a clear political and religious statement that the experiment with monotheism was over. He was the pharaoh who tried to steady the ship of state, even if he did not live long enough to see the job completed. His tomb, meant to ensure his immortality, instead became an eternal snapshot of a fragile young king and the fragile moment in history he embodied. While the treasures of Tutankhamun revealed the splendor of a single pharaoh, our next discovery sprawls across an entire desert plateau, so vast it can only be fully comprehended from the heavens. For centuries, these immense designs lay hidden in plain sight on the arid plains of southern Peru, etched into the dark, sun-baked surface of the Nazca Desert. To anyone walking across the pampa, they were nothing more than shallow grooves in the earth, meaningless scars on the landscape. Their secret remained utterly invisible, locked away until humanity conquered the sky. It was only with the advent of commercial aviation in the early 20th century that passengers peering out of windows saw the truth. A breathtaking gallery of gigantic art, a canvas so large it used the entire desert as its frame. The first systematic study of these geoglyphs is credited to the Peruvian archaeologist Toribio Mejia Zesp, who encountered them while hiking through the foothills in 1927. But the true scale and wonder of the Nazca lines were revealed to the world by a tenacious American historian named Paul Kosok. In the 1930s and 40s, Kosok devoted himself to studying the ancient irrigation systems of the region. While surveying from the ground, he noted long, straight lines that seemed to stretch to the horizon. Intrigued, he chartered a small aircraft to get an aerial view, a perspective that had been impossible for the creators themselves. What he saw from above left him speechless. The desert floor was covered in a complex network of perfectly straight lines, enormous trapezoids, and sprawling triangles that ran for miles. Most astonishing of all were the massive biomorph stylized depictions of animals and plants, including a hummingbird with wings outstretched, a spider, a monkey with a coiled tail, a whale, and a condor with a wingspan stretching nearly 400 feet. The construction of these geoglyphs was a feat of remarkable precision and simple technology. The Nazca people, who flourished between 200 before the Common Era and 600 of the Common Era, created them by removing the top layer of dark, iron oxide-coated pebbles to reveal the lighter-colored sand beneath. This created a striking contrast that has endured for over a millennium in one of the driest places on Earth. They likely used basic surveying tools and mathematical principles, laying out the designs with ropes and stakes. The sheer scale, however, points to a highly organized society capable of planning and executing projects that required a massive coordinated effort, likely under the direction of a powerful religious or political authority. The lines were not built by a primitive culture, but by a sophisticated one with a deep understanding of their environment and a desire to create something permanent and monumental. The central mystery, of course, is why. What compelled the Nazca to undertake such a colossal project for images they could never see in their entirety? This question has spawned a host of theories, ranging from the scholarly to the wildly speculative. Paul Kosok himself, after observing one of the long lines point directly toward the setting sun on the day of the winter solstice, famously dubbed the lines the largest astronomy book in the world. His successor, the German mathematician and archaeologist Maria Reich, dedicated her life to studying and preserving the lines, further developing the astronomical calendar theory. She believed many of the lines aligned with celestial bodies and important solar events, crucial for an agricultural society that depended on knowing the seasons. Others proposed the lines served as sacred pathways for ritual processions. In this theory, priests or pilgrims would walk along the lines to reach the giant animal figures, which may have been religious totems or deities. This idea is supported by the discovery of ceramic potsherds and remains of offerings at the endpoints of some lines, suggesting they were sites of veneration. The act of walking the lines themselves could have been a form of spiritual journey. A more pragmatic theory suggests the lines marked underground aquifers, acting as a vast map for the region's precious water sources, which were the lifeblood of the Nazca civilization. The most famous and most controversial theory came from author Erich von Däniken in his 1968 book, Chariots of the Gods. He proposed that the Nazca lines were landing strips or signals for ancient astronauts, extraterrestrial visitors whom ancient peoples mistook for gods. While this idea captured the public imagination, it is overwhelmingly rejected by archaeologists. It not only ignores the proven capabilities of the Nazca people, but also represents a deeply condescending view of ancient cultures, suggesting they needed outside help to achieve their magnificent works. The true impact of the Nazca lines' discovery lies not in choosing a single theory, but in how they fundamentally reshaped our perception of pre-Columbian South America. Before they were seen from the air, many Western scholars viewed ancient Peruvian cultures as relatively simple and isolated. The lines shattered that notion. They revealed a society with complex cosmological beliefs, advanced knowledge of geometry and surveying, and the social organization to carry out a centuries-long project with religious or cultural significance. They demonstrate a different kind of advancement, not just in stonework or metallurgy, but in abstract thought and landscape-scale art. The lines are a powerful testament to the human drive to create, to communicate with the gods, or perhaps to leave a mark so permanent that it would outlast their civilization by thousands of years. A message to the future written in the earth itself, waiting for the world to rise high enough to finally read it. Yet the debate surrounding the Vinland map is far more than a simple question of authenticity. Its emergence tapped directly into a much older and fiercer historical argument: who really discovered America? For centuries, the story of Christopher Columbus's voyage in 1492 was the foundational Eurocentric narrative of the discovery of the New World. The map, if genuine, would be physical, cartographic proof that Norse explorers had not only reached North America, but had mapped it, embedding that knowledge within European scholarly circles long before Columbus set sail. It was a direct challenge to a cornerstone of Western history, and this is precisely why the debate became so emotionally and academically charged. The stakes were not just about a piece of parchment, they were about rewriting a mythic origin story. The scientific battle over the map's ink became the central front in this war. Initial analysis in the 1970s seemed to deliver a fatal blow. Researchers at the University of California, Davis, used proton microprobe analysis and declared that the ink contained anatase, a specific crystalline form of titanium dioxide. They argued that anatase of the purity found in the map's ink was not available until the 1920s, making the map a modern forgery. case closed, or so it seemed. But science, like history, is subject to reinterpretation. In the 1980s, researchers from the University of California, Davis, re-examined the map using more advanced techniques, including Raman microprobe spectroscopy. They not only confirmed the presence of anatase, but also found that the ink was atop the medieval parchment's cracks and folds, suggesting it was applied long after the parchment was created. The evidence for a 20th century forgery appeared overwhelming, yet the map's defenders refused to surrender. They proposed counter-theories that could explain the anatase. Perhaps it was a natural contaminant from the sand used to dry the ink, or maybe it formed from other minerals present in the medieval ink recipe over centuries of deterioration. A comprehensive study led by the researchers at the University of Arizona in 2002 used radiocarbon dating to confirm that the parchment itself was indeed medieval, dating to around 1435. This proved the physical material was old, but it couldn't confirm when the lines were drawn on it. The most recent and perhaps most definitive analysis came in 2018 from a team at Yale. Using the most sophisticated tools available, including advanced spectroscopy, they performed a new elemental analysis of the entire map's ink. Their findings were devastating. They discovered that the ink contained high levels of titanium, consistent with a synthetic titanium pigment first produced in Norway in 1923. Furthermore, they found that the linework was, without doubt, drawn over the parchment's medieval staining and wear, a clear sign of a modern hand at work. The team concluded the ink was 20th century, and the map is almost certainly a clever, deliberate fake. But if it is a forgery, the mystery only deepens. Who created it and why? The most compelling theory points to a Jesuit priest and cartographic enthusiast named Father Joseph Fisher, who had access to medieval manuscripts and had written about the Norse discoveries. Another potential culprit is a shadowy Austrian dealer. The motive was likely financial, aiming to create a sensational, nation-defining document that could be sold for a fortune to a wealthy American collector. The timing is also suspicious. It appeared just as the scholarly world was beginning to seriously consider the Norse sagas as historical sources, making it the perfect storm of opportunity and desire. The Vinland map, therefore, occupies a unique and paradoxical place in history. It is likely a fake, but it is a fake that forced a very real and necessary conversation. It propelled the then fringe ideas of Norse exploration into the mainstream academic spotlight, accelerating research and public interest in the topic. This increased attention undoubtedly helped fuel the archaeological work that would, just a few years later in the 1960s, lead to the unambiguous, undeniable discovery of the real Norse site at Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland by the team of Helge and Anne Stein-Ingstad. That settlement provided the concrete, archaeological proof the map could not. So while the Vinland map itself may be a beautiful deception, its role in challenging a comfortable historical narrative and pushing us to uncover a more complex, truthful past is its lasting and utterly ironic legacy. Shifting our focus from vast desert drawings to a small, unassuming clay pot, we encounter a discovery that seems to defy the very timeline of human innovation. In 1936, workers excavating for a new railway near Baghdad in the village of Qujat Rabu unearthed a peculiar object that would become one of archaeology's most tantalizing enigmas. It was a simple, vase-shaped jar of bright yellow clay standing about 5 inches tall. Inside, however, was anything but simple. Suspended from an asphalt plug that sealed the jar's top was an iron rod encased within a carefully rolled copper cylinder. This strange assembly, along with a dozen other similar finds from the nearby Parthian period, around 200 years before the Common Era to 200 of the Common Era, was initially catalogued and stored in the basement of the National Museum of Iraq. For years, it gathered dust, its true potential completely overlooked. The object's radical reinterpretation came from a German museum director named Wilhelm Koenig, who either studied the jars in the late 1930s or was among the original excavators. The historical record is slightly unclear. Looking at the components, Koenig saw something no one else had: the basic elements of an electrochemical cell. The iron rod and the copper cylinder, when immersed in an acidic electrolyte like vinegar or grape juice, would act as electrodes, creating a potential difference or voltage between them. The asphalt plug would have served as a perfect seal to hold the electrodes in place and prevent the electrolyte from spilling. In essence, Koenig proposed that this was an ancient battery, a galvanic cell predating the work of Alessandro Volta by nearly 2,000 years. He published his theory, and the world was introduced to the concept of the Baghdad battery. If Koenig was correct, the implications are staggering. It suggests that certain ancient cultures may have been dabbling in principles of electricity long before it was formally understood. The immediate question, of course, is what would they have used it for? The most popular and enduring theory involves electroplating. Artisans of the time were masters of gilding and silvering objects, often using mercury-based solutions. A weak electrical current could have significantly enhanced this process, allowing for a more efficient and durable bond of gold or silver onto another metal, like a statue or a piece of jewelry. This would explain the existence of exquisitely plated artifacts from the region that have long puzzled historians, who assumed the techniques were merely mechanical. Another theory posits a medical application. Ancient Greek and Roman texts describe the use of electric fish to administer shocks for pain relief. Could a controlled current from a battery have been used in a similar fashion for rudimentary electrotherapy? Or perhaps the effect was purely mystical: the ability to generate a faint tingling sensation or a mysterious glow could have been a powerful tool for priests seeking to inspire awe and fear during religious ceremonies. However, the skeptical view offers more mundane, yet still historically valuable explanations. The primary counter-argument is that these jars were simply secure storage containers for important religious or magical scrolls. The iron and copper rods could have been the core of a scroll made of perishable materials like parchment or papyrus. The asphalt seal would have protected the sacred contents from moisture and insects. This is a perfectly logical explanation, as numerous ancient cultures stored scrolls in sealed jars. The famous Dead Sea Scrolls were found in exactly this manner. Other skeptics point out the complete absence of any associated wires, conductors, or other apparatus that would be necessary to utilize an electrical current. Furthermore, if these were indeed batteries, why have we not found any depictions of them in art, or any written records describing their function or construction? The silence from the historical record is, for many, deafening. The debate between these two camps is a perfect microcosm of the challenges we face when interpreting the ancient world. It pits an exciting, paradigm-shifting possibility against a cautious, conservative reading of the archaeological evidence. The truth may never be fully settled. What makes the Baghdad battery so profoundly important, regardless of its actual function, is the questions it forces us to ask. It challenges our sometimes condescending assumption that technological progress is a straight, predictable line, and that our ancestors were incapable of stumbling upon complex concepts through experimentation and observation. Perhaps a curious artisan, combining different metals in an acidic solution, noticed a strange sensation or saw a metal object begin to transform and decided to harness the effect. Even if the Baghdad battery was just a storage jar, its existence as a theoretical possibility expands our view of ancient ingenuity. It serves as a permanent reminder that the past is filled with quiet, unassuming objects that hold the potential to completely rewrite our understanding of human creativity, reminding us that a single clay pot can contain not just an iron rod, but an entire universe of possibility. Moving from the tangible mechanics of potential ancient batteries to an artifact that exists at the very intersection of faith, science, and history, we come to perhaps the most debated and intensely studied religious object in the world. Housed in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy, this piece of linen is not visually striking at first glance. It is a long, narrow cloth measuring approximately 14 feet by 3.5 feet, yellowed with age and marked by a distinct, faint sepia-toned image. It is the image of a man, front and back, bearing the unmistakable wounds of crucifixion. This is the Shroud of Turin, and for millions it is not merely an artifact, it is the sacred burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth. Its journey from obscurity to global fame is a story woven with mystery, controversy, and an unwavering human desire to find proof of the divine. The shroud's documented history begins quite suddenly in the 1350s. A French knight named Geoffroy de Charny presented it to the collegiate church he founded in Liéry, France. Its appearance was met with immediate controversy. The local bishop of Troyes, Henry de Poitiers, investigated the shroud and declared it a clever forgery, stating the artist who created it had even confessed. For the next few centuries, it was owned by the House of Savoy, eventually moving to Turin in 1694. Its status was that of a revered but privately held relic, its authenticity a matter of personal faith rather than scientific inquiry. That all changed in the year 1898, when an Italian amateur photographer named Secondo Pia was granted permission to photograph the shroud for the first time. As he developed the glass negative plates in his darkroom, he experienced a shock that would ignite the modern fascination with the cloth. The negative image revealed a stunning, lifelike positive portrait of a bearded man with a serene yet pained expression. The faint markings on the cloth suddenly became a photographically perfect depiction, a level of detail and dimensionality utterly impossible for any medieval artist to have created. This single event transformed the shroud from a religious curiosity into a profound historical and scientific enigma. The image on the shroud is incredibly complex. It is not painted with any known pigment. Scientific analysis has shown the coloration resides only on the very topmost fibrils of the linen threads, a depth of mere micrometers. It is not a substance applied to the cloth, but a chemical change to the cellulose of the linen itself, a degradation akin to a very subtle scorch. The body image is a perfect anatomical representation of a man who has been crucified in the exact manner described in the Gospels. There are wounds on the wrists and feet consistent with Roman nails. There are what appear to be over 100 lash marks from a Roman flagrum across the back and legs. There are bruises on the face and a puncture wound on the right side of the chest. Most strikingly, the head shows numerous puncture wounds around the scalp, matching the crown of thorns. The blood stains, which have been determined to be real human blood of the type AB, are also anatomically perfect, showing flows that would have occurred from a vertical crucifixion and from a post-mortem chest wound. For believers, this is not a coincidence. It is a perfect forensic match to the Passion of Christ. The scientific investigation of the shroud, known as syndenology, exploded in the 20th century. In 1978, a team of American scientists and researchers known as the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP, was granted unprecedented access for 5 days of around-the-clock testing. They used the most advanced technology of the era, including spectrophotometry, X-ray fluorescence, and infrared thermography. They took thousands of photographs and countless samples of dust and fibers from the cloth. Their conclusion was startling. They found no evidence of any pigments, paints, dyes, or stains that could account for the image. They confirmed the blood was real and that the image was not a painting but appeared to be the result of an oxidation-dehydration reaction that had subtly altered the linen. Their official conclusion was that the image was that of a real human form of a scourged, crucified man, that it was not the product of an artist, and that while the method of image formation remained unknown, it could not be replicated by the science of 1978. This was seen by many as a powerful endorsement of its authenticity. However, the scientific story took a dramatic turn a decade later. In 1988, the Vatican granted permission for a new, seemingly definitive test, radiocarbon dating. 3 prestigious laboratories at the University of Oxford, the University of Arizona, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology were each given a small postage stamp-sized sample of the shroud, carefully cut from a single area on the edge of the linen. The results, published in the prestigious journal Nature, were unequivocal. All 3 labs independently dated the shroud's linen to between 1260 and 1390 with a 95% confidence level. This placed its origin squarely in the medieval period, seemingly confirming the initial bishop's claim from the 1350s that it was a forgery. For many in the scientific community, the case was closed. The Shroud of Turin was a brilliant but medieval fake. Yet, for Syndenologists and many faithful, the case was far from closed. They immediately raised serious objections to the carbon dating process. They argued that the sample taken was from an edge of the cloth that had been handled, mended, and possibly contaminated over centuries. The shroud survived a severe fire in 1532 in the chapel in Chambéry, France, where it was stored. It was doused with water to put out the flames, and molten silver from its reliquary box burned through several layers of the folded cloth. Critics of the carbon dating argue that this event could have introduced microbial contamination and carbon-based pollutants that would have significantly skewed the radiocarbon results, making the linen appear centuries younger than it actually is. Subsequent research has shown that complex carbon bonding from such an event is indeed possible and could invalidate the dating. Furthermore, the consistent, flawless anatomical details and the unknown chemical process that created the photonegative image remain entirely unexplained by any known medieval technology. How could a forger in the 1300s have created an image with 3-dimensional data encoded in it, a feature only understood with 20th century image analysis technology? How could they have known precise anatomical details of Roman crucifixion that were lost to history and only rediscovered by modern archaeologists? The enduring power of the Shroud of Turin lies in this perfect, unresolvable tension. It is a profound Rorschach test for the human mind. For the skeptical scientist, the carbon date is the final, objective word. For the faithful, the inexplicable nature of the image is a miracle that transcends a single scientific test. It forces a confrontation between 2 different ways of knowing, empirical evidence and spiritual belief. It challenges the authority of science while simultaneously relying on it for validation. The shroud, whether a divine relic or an unparalleled medieval hoax, is a permanent monument to our deepest questions. It asks us what we are willing to believe, what we need to prove, and whether some mysteries are meant to remain just that, mysteries, eternally suspended between the world of fact and the realm of faith. While the Shroud of Turin presents a mystery locked within the fibers of a single cloth, our next discovery offers an entire city frozen in a single moment of unimaginable terror. For over 1,500 years, it lay hidden, its very existence fading into legend. Then, in the spring of 1748, a crew of engineers digging a canal for the King of Naples stumbled upon something astonishing. Their shovels struck not just earth, but intricately carved marble and brilliantly colored frescoes buried deep beneath the surface. They had accidentally found the lost city of Pompeii, a place entombed by the catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the year 79 of the Common Era. This was not a slow decay into ruins. It was a sudden, violent snapshot of Roman life, preserved under a blanket of volcanic ash and pumice that solidified into a perfect, airtight cast. The initial excavations were more like treasure hunts, with tunnels dug haphazardly to retrieve beautiful statues and artworks for the private collections of the wealthy. It wasn't until the 19th century that a more systematic archaeological approach was adopted, one that sought to understand the city itself, not just plunder its beauty. As workers carefully cleared the hardened volcanic material, a ghostly world began to emerge. They found entire streets, shops, temples, and amphitheaters, all standing exactly as they were left on that fateful August day. The volcanic debris had acted as an incredible preservative, protecting the city from the eroding forces of wind, rain, and later human settlement that had destroyed so many other ancient sites. This was an entire urban environment suspended in time. The most heartbreaking and revealing finds were the hollow spaces in the compacted ash. Archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli realized these cavities were the perfect molds of the victims' bodies, their shapes preserved where they had fallen as the organic material decayed. By carefully injecting plaster into these voids, Fiorelli and his team could create stunningly detailed casts of the doomed Pompeians in their final moments. We see a man struggling to pull himself up, a woman shielding her child, a group of huddled figures waiting for a rescue that would never come, and even a chained guard dog. These are not skeletons, they are frozen gestures of human despair, making the tragedy feel shockingly immediate and personal even after 2 millennia. They offer a silent, poignant testimony to the human cost of the disaster. Beyond the tragedy, the sheer completeness of Pompeii's preservation offers an unparalleled window into the daily rhythms of an ordinary Roman city. This is not the story of emperors and gladiators, but of bakers, shopkeepers, and families. We can walk down its stone-paved streets, deeply grooved by centuries of cartwheels, and step over the raised stepping stones that allowed pedestrians to cross without getting their feet wet from the waste that flowed in the gutters. Election notices and advertisements for gladiatorial games are still painted on the walls, the ancient equivalent of political yard signs and concert posters. We can peer into a bakery and see the carbonized loaves of bread still in the oven, and step inside a thermopolium, a Roman fast food counter, with deep pots still set into the marble countertop ready to serve hot stew and wine. The homes tell equally intimate stories, from the grand villa of the Mysteries with its breathtaking frescoes depicting a mysterious religious initiation rite to the more modest houses with their atriums and gardens. We gain a profound understanding of Roman social structure, domestic life, and artistic taste. Graffiti scrawled on the walls ranges from declarations of love to insults aimed at neighbors, proving that some aspects of human nature are truly timeless. We know what they ate from the remains found in their kitchens, we know what jewelry they wore, and we know what tools their doctors used. This level of detail is simply unavailable from any other archaeological site in the world. The discovery of Pompeii and its smaller neighbor Herculaneum, which was buried by an even more destructive pyroclastic flow, did nothing less than revolutionize classical studies. Before its excavation, our knowledge of Roman life came almost entirely from literary sources written by and for the elite, the speeches of Cicero, the histories of Tacitus, the poetry of Virgil. Pompeii gave a voice to the other 99%. It provided the material context for those texts, grounding them in a physical reality. Historians could now see how architecture reflected social status, how commerce functioned on a street level, and how widespread literacy might have actually been. It transformed the Romans from characters in a book into real, three-dimensional people with hopes, fears, and daily routines not so different from our own. The city's silent streets continue to speak volumes, offering an incomparable and deeply human connection to the ancient world that no other discovery can match. While the ashes of Pompeii preserved a single day in intricate detail, our next discovery spans millions of years, a secret buried deep in the bedrock of the American West that would force humanity to completely reimagine the entire history of life on Earth. This story, however, is not one of careful, collaborative science, but of an all-out war. In the decades following the American Civil War, as the nation expanded westward, railroad crews and prospectors began reporting strange, gigantic bones weathering out of the barren badlands. These reports ignited a fierce, bitter, and deeply personal rivalry between two brilliant, wealthy, and monumentally stubborn paleontologists, Othniel Charles Marsh of Yale University and Edward Drinker Cope of the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. Their decades-long conflict, which became known as the Bone Wars, was a chaotic mix of groundbreaking science and outright sabotage, driven by an insatiable hunger for discovery and an equally powerful desire to utterly destroy one another. Their methods were as dramatic as any Western. They funded their own private fossil hunting expeditions into lawless territories, often employing more gunmen than scientists to protect their finds from each other and from hostile Native American tribes. They set up rival camps, sometimes within sight of each other, and would resort to bribing each other's team members, spying, and even destroying priceless fossil sites to prevent their rival from excavating them. In one notorious incident, Cope's team, upon discovering a spectacular cache of fossils, hastily covered the site with dirt and posted an armed guard to keep Marsh's men away. Marsh's team, in turn, reportedly rolled boulders down cliffs to block the only access routes to Cope's dig sites. They slandered each other in academic journals and public newspapers, each trying to ruin the other's reputation and funding. It was a scientific feud of epic proportions, fueled by ego, ambition, and the sheer thrill of the hunt. Yet, for all its childish pettiness and destructive waste, this vicious competition produced an astonishing scientific windfall. In their frantic race to name more new species than the other, Marsh and Cope and their teams unearthed the first complete skeletons of dinosaurs the world had ever seen, creatures so fantastical they seemed to be from another planet. It was Marsh who identified and named the Triceratops with its massive three-horned skull and the Stegosaurus with its bizarre plated back and spiked tail. He also described the Apatosaurus and Brontosaurus, though a later discovery revealed they were the same animal. Cope, not to be outdone, discovered the fierce predator Dryptosaurus and the colossal sea reptile Elasmosaurus, though he famously reconstructed it with its head on the wrong end, a mistake Marsh publicly ridiculed for years. Together, they effectively created the field of American vertebrate paleontology, moving it from a European-dominated pursuit of curiosity into a rigorous, if chaotic, scientific discipline. The sheer volume of their discoveries was staggering. Between them, they unearthed and described over 130 new species of dinosaurs and other prehistoric animals. They filled the museums at Yale and Philadelphia with tons of fossilized bone, providing the raw material for generations of future scientists to study. More importantly, their finds provided the first concrete evidence of the immense scale and diversity of prehistoric life. Before the Bone Wars, the concept of dinosaurs was still new and based on fragmentary finds. Marsh and Cope revealed an entire lost world of giants that had once roamed North America, a world of incredible beasts that had ruled the earth for millions of years before humans ever existed. This fundamentally altered humanity's perception of its own place in natural history. We were not the culmination of a short, biblically timed earthly drama, but recent arrivals on a planet with a deep, complex, and terrifying past dominated by creatures beyond our wildest imagination. Their legacy, therefore, is a deeply paradoxical one. They advanced science through profoundly unscientific behavior. Their personal animosity led to rushed publications, misidentified species, and a legacy of confusion that paleontologists are still untangling today. Yet, it also drove them to explore further, dig faster, and publicize their finds more dramatically than any cautious, methodical scientist would have. They captured the public's imagination like never before. Newspaper accounts of their discoveries and their feud made dinosaurs household names and ignited a global fascination that continues to this day. The Bone Wars were messy, unethical, and glorious. They remind us that the path to knowledge is not always a straight line of reasoned debate, but is sometimes a desperate, dirty, and thrilling scramble through the dirt. a race where the ultimate prize is not just a fossil, but a permanent rewrite of our understanding of the world itself. But from the sun-scorched badlands of a fossil war, we now travel to the quiet, grassy fields of Suffolk, England, where a single curious landowner and a self-taught archaeologist would unearth a different kind of king. For years, people had wondered about the strange, ghostly mounds that dotted the estate at Sutton Hoo. Local legend whispered they were the graves of Vikings or perhaps contained cursed treasure. It wasn't until 1939, with the shadow of a new world war looming over Europe, that these legends were put to the test. The land's owner, a widow named Edith Pretty, intrigued by the folklore, enlisted the help of a local archaeologist named Basil Brown to investigate the largest of the mounds. With little more than a trowel and a gardener's wheelbarrow, Brown began to dig, expecting to find perhaps a few fragments of bone or pottery. What he uncovered instead was the ghost of a ship, and with it the lost soul of a kingdom. As Brown and his small team carefully scraped away the soil, they didn't find wood, but a stunning impression in the sand, the perfect, dark stain of a 90-foot-long ocean-going vessel. The ship's timber had long since rotted away in the acidic soil, but its rivets remained in place, outlining the sleek, powerful curves of the hull. It was a ship burial, a funerary practice reserved for the most elite of Germanic and Scandinavian heroes. And at the center of this ghost ship was a buried treasure chamber, a room built where the vessel's mast would have stood, packed with some of the most magnificent artifacts ever discovered on British soil. The treasures they carefully extracted from the earth were nothing short of royal. There was a magnificent ceremonial helmet of iron and bronze, with a face mask featuring a nose, mustache, and eyebrows that formed the shape of a flying dragon, its wings forming the eyebrows and its body curving back to form the mustache. It was both a piece of protective gear and a terrifying, symbolic work of art, likely worn not in battle but for ceremonial occasions to project immense power and authority. They found a heavy, intricate gold belt buckle covered in intricate interlace patterns of writhing animals, a masterpiece of Anglo-Saxon metalwork. There were silver bowls from the Byzantine Empire, luxurious drinking horns made from the tusks of an African elephant, and a set of exquisitely decorated shoulder clasps made of gold, garnet, and mosaic glass, designed to hold a leather cuirass together. Perhaps most telling of all was a large, ornate whetstone carved with human faces on each end. It was no simple sharpening tool, it was a scepter, a powerful symbol of office, suggesting its owner held the right to give judgments and command obedience. But who was this king? The body had vanished, completely dissolved by the acidic soil, leaving only a faint shadow and a pile of dust where he had lain. The evidence, however, points compellingly to Redwald, a king of East Anglia who ruled in the early 7th century. Historical records describe him as a powerful ruler who achieved the title of Bretwalda, or Britain ruler, a term denoting a kind of overlordship over several Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. He was a man caught between worlds, having converted to Christianity, but later returning to the pagan faith of his ancestors under pressure from his wife and court. This spiritual conflict is eerily reflected in the grave goods, which include 2 small silver Christian spoons, possibly baptismal gifts, placed amongst a trove of items celebrating the warrior culture and pagan cosmology of the Germanic world. The impact of Sutton, who was seismic for our understanding of a period often dismissively called the Dark Ages. This label suggested a time of cultural bankruptcy, violence, and ignorance following the collapse of Roman rule in Britain. The Sutton Hoo burial shattered that myth completely. Here was staggering evidence of sophisticated artistry, complex social hierarchy, and vast international trade networks. The garnets in the jewelry likely came from Sri Lanka or India, the silver from the Mediterranean, and the elephant ivory from Africa. This was not an isolated, backward society. It was a connected, wealthy, and highly sophisticated kingdom engaged in diplomacy and trade across the known world. The craftsmanship rivaled anything being produced in Byzantium or mainland Europe, demonstrating that Anglo-Saxon England was a place of vibrant cultural fusion, where Germanic animal-style art met classical motifs and techniques. The burial did not signify a decline from Roman times, but rather the brilliant, fiery dawn of a new, distinctively English culture. It gave a name, a face, and a glorious material culture to a historical figure who was previously just a few lines in an old chronicle, proving that the so-called Dark Ages were, in fact, filled with a radiant and powerful light. Yet while the treasures of Sutton, who revealed a sophisticated kingdom, our next discovery takes us back to a time before kings, before empires, before even the most basic foundations of what we call civilization. For generations, the accepted story of human progress followed a simple, logical sequence. First, around 12,000 years ago, humans learned to farm, domesticating plants and animals in what we call the Neolithic Revolution. This shift to agriculture produced a surplus of food, which in turn allowed people to settle down in permanent villages. With more people living together, society grew more complex, leading to specialized jobs, social hierarchies, and eventually, the need for organized religion to bind these new communities together. Temples, priests, and grand ritual sites were seen as the result of agriculture, the glittering cultural product of a settled, farming life. This narrative was a cornerstone of archaeology until a solitary shepherd and a curious archaeologist stumbled upon a hill in southeastern Turkey that would dismantle this entire timeline. The place was known locally as Göbekli Tepe, which translates to Potbelly Hill. For decades, archaeologists had surveyed the area, noticing a few broken limestone slabs and written it off as a medieval cemetery. But in 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt decided to take a closer look. He had read a brief report from a survey in the 1960s that mentioned the possibility of Neolithic flints on the hill. When he arrived, he immediately saw what others had missed. The entire summit was littered with an enormous quantity of worked flint, a telltale sign of intense prehistoric activity. And then he saw the tops of the stones, massive T-shaped limestone pillars deliberately buried and waiting to be uncovered. Schmidt instantly knew he was looking at something extraordinary. He would later say, "The first time I saw it, I knew I had two choices: go away and tell nobody, or spend the rest of my life working here." He chose the latter, and in doing so, he began excavating a site that would force a complete rewrite of human prehistory. What his team uncovered over the next 2 decades was staggering. Carved from the living bedrock of the hill, they found a series of at least 20 circular or oval enclosures. Each of these enormous rings was defined by a wall of rough stone benches, and standing proudly from the center of these walls were massive T-shaped monoliths. The largest of these pillars soar 20 feet tall and weigh an astounding 10 to 20 tons each. The scale of the construction is immense, but it is the artistry that truly astonishes. These are not crude rocks, they are masterfully shaped and smoothed pillars, intricately carved with a menagerie of animals: foxes, snakes, wild boars, cranes, gazelles, and ferocious lions. The carvings are deep, elegant, and shockingly sophisticated. This was not the work of simple, primitive hunter-gatherers. This was a project of staggering ambition, requiring a level of planning, organization, and symbolic thought that archaeologists had never dreamed possible for this era. And the era is the most mind-bending part. Through radiocarbon dating of organic material found in the plaster holding the stones together, the main structures at Göbekli Tepe were firmly dated to between 9,500 and 8,000 years before the Common Era. This places its construction squarely in the pre-pottery Neolithic period, a time when humans were still believed to be small, nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers. This date, over 11,000 years old, makes Göbekli Tepe the oldest known megalithic complex in the world, predating Stonehenge by a staggering 6,000 years. But the real bombshell was this: There is no evidence whatsoever that the people who built Göbekli Tepe were farmers. Analysis of animal bones found on site shows they were hunting wild game like gazelle and aurochs. There are no signs of domesticated wheat, barley, or animals. They were, by all available evidence, hunter-gatherers. This single fact turns the traditional narrative on its head. Göbekli Tepe suggests that hunter-gatherers were capable of immense, coordinated communal effort and complex symbolic thought long before the invention of agriculture. It wasn't that farming created surplus which led to complex society and then religion. The reverse may be true. Perhaps it was the need to come together for shared ritual and belief, the need to build and maintain a place like Göbekli Tepe, that drove humanity toward agriculture. This is a theory known as cathedral building first. Think of the logistics. To feed the large groups of people required to quarry, carve, and erect these multi-ton pillars, you would need a reliable food supply. You couldn't rely solely on hunting and gathering, which requires constant movement. This may have provided the incentive to start cultivating wild grains on a larger scale, to brew beer for feasts, to domesticate animals to feed the workers. In this new light, agriculture wasn't the cause of civilization. It may have been its side effect, a practical solution to fuel humanity's first overwhelming urge to come together and build something monumental for the gods. But what exactly was Göbekli Tepe? Without written records, we can only interpret the stones. The most prevalent theory is that it was a regional cult center, a place where nomadic bands from across a wide territory would gather at specific times of the year for shared rituals and feasts. The carvings of dangerous and powerful animals may represent a complex mythology, a spirit world of totems and guardians. The central T-shaped pillars are abstract but strikingly humanoid. Many feature carved arms, hands, and loincloths, suggesting they are stylized representations of powerful ancestors or deities watching over the gatherings. After more than a millennium of use, something remarkable happened. Around 8,000 before the Common Era, the entire site was deliberately and carefully buried under tons of earth and stone, preserved for millennia like a time capsule. We don't know why. Perhaps beliefs changed or a new religion emerged. What we do know is that this deliberate entombment is the reason the carvings remain so impeccably preserved today. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe is more than just a new entry in the record books. It is a fundamental challenge to our understanding of the human journey. It forces us to reconsider the motivations behind our species' greatest leap forward. It suggests that the human capacity for symbolic thought, collective action, and the pursuit of something beyond mere survival, the spiritual, the artistic, the communal, is far older and more powerful than we ever imagined. This wasn't a village that grew a temple. This was a temple that may have inspired a new way of living. It stands as a silent, stone rebuttal to the idea of linear progress, proving that our ancestors' dreams were every bit as vast and complex as our own, carved into the very heart of the hill for all eternity. Leaving behind the organized ritual of Göbekli Tepe, we now descend into a much darker, more intimate space, a sacred gallery not built by human hands but discovered by pure, youthful chance. The year was 1940, and France was under the grim shadow of Nazi occupation. In the quiet village of Montignac in the Dordogne region, 4 teenage boys were out for a walk with their dog, Robot. As the story goes, Robot became fixated on a hole at the base of an uprooted tree and chased a rabbit deep into it. The boys, determined to rescue their pet, widened the opening and squeezed into the narrow, dark passage. They slid down into the earth, and in the flickering light of a makeshift lamp, they beheld a sight no human eyes had seen for thousands of years. The walls around them were not bare rock. They were alive with a breathtaking, swirling panorama of ancient beasts. They had stumbled into the Lascaux cave, and in doing so, they had opened a portal directly into the mind of Paleolithic humanity. What the boys found that day was far more than a few simple sketches. It was a complex, multi-chambered sanctuary, now known as the Sistine Chapel of Prehistory. Its walls and ceilings covered in over 600 paintings and nearly 1,500 engravings. The art was stunningly sophisticated, rendered in vibrant shades of red, yellow, black, and brown from mineral pigments like iron oxide and manganese. The artists used the natural contours of the rock to give their subjects a startling three-dimensional life. A bulging ledge becomes the powerful shoulder of a bull. A dip in the ceiling suggests the curve of a galloping horse's back. The animals are not static portraits, they are dynamic, bursting with movement and vitality. Herds of stags seem to swim across the stone, their antlers swaying. A mighty, charging aurochs exudes raw power, while a peculiar, stick-figured bird-headed man lies prone before a wounded bison with its entrails hanging out. A rare and enigmatic scene that hints at a complex narrative or myth. The sheer number and variety of creatures depicted is a frozen snapshot of a lost world. There are animals that were common prey, like horses and stags, but also formidable predators like cave lions and bears, and most astonishingly, immense wild cattle known as aurochs, which have been extinct for centuries. This was not a random doodling, it was a deliberate, curated bestiary. The most famous section, the Hall of the Bulls, is a staggering 46 feet long, its walls dominated by 4 colossal black aurochs, the largest of which is over 17 feet from horn to tail, a monumental feat of artistic planning and execution that would be impressive in any era, let alone 17,000 years ago. The discovery immediately captured the world's imagination, but its true revolution was intellectual. Before Lascaux and other sites like it, there was a lingering, condescending view of our earliest ancestors as simple, brutish creatures focused solely on survival. These paintings delivered a powerful, undeniable rebuttal. They proved that Upper Paleolithic humans, often dismissively called cavemen, possessed cognitive abilities identical to our own. They had a profound capacity for symbolic thought, abstract reasoning, and artistic expression. They could plan complex projects, mix paints, build scaffolds to reach high ceilings, and perhaps most importantly, they felt a deep, compelling need to create, to translate the world around them and the world inside their minds into enduring images. This wasn't just decoration, it was communication across an unimaginable gulf of time. But what was the purpose of this immense effort deep in the lightless bowels of the earth? This is the central, tantalizing mystery of Lascaux. The cave was clearly not a dwelling. Evidence suggests people visited it briefly and for specific reasons. The most widely accepted theory is that it served a profound spiritual or ritual function, a place for shamanistic practices. In this view, the act of painting an animal was a form of sympathetic magic, a way to gain power over it and ensure a successful hunt. The many overlapping images, painted over thousands of years, might represent generations returning to the same sacred space to perform rituals, to connect with the spirit world of the animals they depended on for survival. The rare human figures, like the bird-headed man, could depict a shaman in a trance state, journeying between worlds. Other theories suggest the caves were used for initiations, where adolescents were brought to learn the tribe's stories, myths, and the identities of the spirit animals that guided their people. The acoustic properties of certain chambers have also been noted. Perhaps the echoing sounds of chanting or drumming deep within the cave were part of an immersive ritual experience. The story of Lascaux, however, has a tragic modern chapter. After the war, the cave was opened to the public, and by the 1950s, thousands of visitors were tramping through its chambers daily. They brought with them a destructive modern invader, carbon dioxide, heat, and humidity from their breath, along with dust and foreign molds and lichens. The pristine environment that had preserved the paintings for millennia was being destroyed in a matter of years. A green fungus known as lichen noir began to spread across the surfaces, threatening to obliterate the art forever. In 1963, the French government made the difficult but necessary decision to permanently close the original Lascaux cave to the public in order to save it. Today, only a handful of scientists are permitted to enter for brief periods of study, to share the wonder with the world. An incredible, precise full-scale replica, known as Lascaux II, was built nearby, allowing visitors to experience the awe of the discovery without harming the irreplaceable original. The legacy of Lascaux is therefore twofold. It stands as an eternal testament to the birth of the human spirit, to that moment when we began to use symbolism to make sense of our existence, our world, and our place within it. It connects us directly to those artists separated by hundreds of generations, and reminds us that the drive to create, to tell stories, and to seek meaning is woven into the very fabric of our species. Simultaneously, its modern plight serves as a sobering lesson in stewardship. It reminds us that these fragile windows into the deep past are non-renewable resources, incredibly vulnerable to the modern world. The Lascaux cave paintings are more than just art. They are the first chapter of our story, a silent, magnificent roar from the darkness that continues to echo through the ages. For the next chapter in our journey, we leave behind the painted caves of Europe and set sail across the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Our destination is one of the most isolated inhabited islands on Earth, a tiny volcanic speck of land known locally as Rapa Nui. It was here, on a bright Sunday in April 1722, a Dutch explorer named Jacob Roggeveen first laid eyes on its shores, and in doing so, gave it the name the world would come to know it by, Easter Island. What he and his crew saw as they approached was a landscape that would baffle and haunt the Western imagination for centuries. Rolling green hills were dotted with hundreds, perhaps thousands, of enormous stone figures, their backs to the sea, their faces staring with hollow eyes over a silent, seemingly deserted land. These were the Moai, and their discovery posed a riddle that seemed utterly unsolvable. How could a people with no metal tools, no wheels, and no large animals have carved, moved, and erected these colossal statues, some weighing over 80 tons? And why did they do it on an island with such limited resources? The initial European theories were predictably condescending and fantastical. Some suggested the statues were the work of lost giants or survivors from the sunken continent of Mu. Others couldn't conceive that the Polynesian people they encountered, whose population had been decimated by introduced diseases and slave raids, could have been the architects of such grandeur. The truth, slowly and painstakingly pieced together by archaeologists, is a far more compelling and human story of breathtaking ingenuity, profound spiritual belief, and ultimately a devastating ecological warning. The Moai are not relics of a lost alien race. They are the powerful, stone embodiment of a sophisticated and deeply spiritual culture that thrived in isolation for centuries. The story of the Moai begins at the volcanic quarry of Rano-Raraku, a place that feels less like a workshop and more like a sacred mountain of sleeping giants. Here, the Rapa Nui master carvers used hand-held basalt stone picks called toki to painstakingly chisel the figures directly from the soft volcanic tuff of the crater's slopes. The process was a sacred act connecting the living with their deified ancestors. As a Moai was freed from the rock, it was not merely a statue. It was a vessel or tapu for the supernatural spirit or mana of the ancestor it represented. The nearly 400 figures still in situ at the quarry, in various stages of completion, provide a frozen snapshot of this incredible process. Some are mere outlines emerging from the bedrock, while others are almost fully separated, waiting for the final cut that would release them for their journey across the island. That journey is the second part of the mystery, and it is here that the Rapa Nui demonstrated their brilliant logistical prowess. For decades, the prevailing theory was that the statues, once carved, were laid horizontally on log sledges and laboriously dragged by ropes across miles of rugged terrain. This theory, while logical, has been challenged and enriched by more recent experimental archaeology. A compelling alternative, supported by oral traditions and practical testing, suggests the moai were walked to their final positions. Using a system of ropes, teams of workers would rock the statue from side to side, edging it forward in a controlled, upright shuffle. This method, captured in stunning experiments, not only appears feasible but would have been a powerful ceremonial act, a literal walking of the ancestor across the land to their new home. Either method, however, required a highly organized society and a massive investment of human labor and resources, all dedicated to a single, unifying spiritual purpose. That purpose was fulfilled at the Ahu, the magnificent ceremonial platforms that line the island's coastline. The moai were not meant to stand alone. They were placed with their backs to the ocean upon these stone altars, watching over the villages and clan territories of their living descendants. The final act of consecration was the placing of the pukau, a large cylindrical topknot of red scoria stone that may represent a hat or a stylized hairstyle upon the moai's head. And perhaps most strikingly, the eye sockets, which appear empty to us today, were once inlaid with white coral eyes with pupils of obsidian or red stone. To stand before a completed moai on its Ahu, with its eyes gazing inland, was to be in the presence of a watchful ancestor, a conduit of mana that ensured the fertility of the land and the prosperity of the people. This complex statue-building society thrived for generations, but the very engine of its culture contained the seeds of its own collapse. The most poignant lesson of Easter Island is not one of mystical mystery, but of stark ecological reality. To move the moai required strong ropes, which were made from the fiber of the hawhau tree. To feed the large teams of workers required canoes for deep-sea fishing, which were carved from the tall, sturdy trunks of the giant palm trees that once covered the island. As the statue cult reached its peak and competition between clans intensified, the demand for trees far outstripped the island's ability to regenerate them. Deforestation was rapid and catastrophic. Without trees, the soil eroded, crippling agriculture. Without large trees for canoes, the islanders could no longer access the lucrative deep water fish, turning to less nutritious sources like shellfish and even, as evidence suggests, resorting to cannibalism in times of extreme famine. The society that had built these incredible monuments began to fracture, descending into clan warfare. The most visible symbol of this collapse is the toppled moai. By the time European explorers arrived, nearly every statue had been deliberately pushed face down from its Ahu, a ritual destruction of a rival clan's ancestral power. The narrative of Easter Island has often been told as a simple fable of ecocide, a people who foolishly chopped down their last tree and doomed themselves. But modern scholarship reveals a more nuanced and tragic story. It wasn't just environmental short-sightedness. It was the collision of a fragile ecosystem with a powerful, competitive cultural drive. The Rapa Nui were not ignorant. They were innovative, resilient, and trapped by their own success and spiritual beliefs. Their story is a powerful, microcosmic lesson for our entire planet. It shows how a society's most celebrated achievements can, if unchecked, consume the very resources that make those achievements possible. The silent, stoic moai of Easter Island are not just monuments to a lost people. They are a mirror reflecting our own global challenges of resource management, sustainability, and the complex, often perilous, relationship between human ambition and the environment that sustains it. While the silent moai stand as a solemn warning from a remote island, our next discovery brings us back to the heart of the classical world, to a small, unassuming mound in northern Greece that held a secret of royal proportions. For centuries, the village of Vergina was known only to locals and a handful of scholars aware of the ancient city of Aigai lying beneath it, the original capital of the Macedonian kingdom. Though its historical significance was acknowledged, no one could have predicted the seismic shift in understanding that would erupt from this quiet earth. That shift began in 1977 when a relentless Greek archaeologist, Manolis Andronikos, focused his excavation on the Great Tumulus, a large, man-made hill that had guarded its contents for over 2 millennia. Andronikos, driven by a lifelong conviction that Agai held royal Macedonian tombs, was about to prove himself spectacularly right. As his team dug through the layers of the tumulus, they uncovered a cluster of untouched underground vaults, their doors still sealed with ancient masonry. The most significant of these, known as Tomb 2, was a masterpiece of Macedonian architecture featuring a painted facade and a massive, heavy stone door that had never been breached by looters. When they finally entered the main chamber, the air thick with 2,300 years of stillness, they were met with a sight that defies imagination. This was not a picked-over ruin, it was a perfectly preserved snapshot of royal Macedonian power. The centerpiece was a magnificent marble sarcophagus. Inside it rested a solid gold larnax or chest weighing an astonishing 24 pounds. Upon its lid was embossed the vibrant 16-point star of Vergina, the symbol of the Macedonian royal family. And within this golden casket were the cremated bones of a man, wrapped in a magnificent purple and gold fabric, along with an exquisite golden oak wreath, its leaves and acorns rendered with breathtaking naturalism. But the treasures did not stop there. The chamber was an arsenal and a treasure chest combined. Hanging on the wall was a complete set of weaponry and armor, including a gilded bronze cuirass, a ceremonial shield, and the king's helmet, still incredibly polished and gleaming. In an antechamber, a second, smaller gold larnax was found. This one contained the cremated remains of a woman, adorned with a delicate golden diadem, and was accompanied by a stunning array of silver vessels and gilt bronze vessels. Every object was of the highest quality, speaking to immense wealth, power, and a culture that valued martial prowess and artistic refinement in equal measure. The sheer weight of the evidence, the untouched nature of the tomb, the royal symbol, the quality of the grave goods, and its location in the ancient capital pointed to one irresistible conclusion. Manolis Andronikos had found the burial place of none other than Philip II of Macedon, the father of Alexander the Great, and his final wife Cleopatra Eurydice. The identification of the occupant was not just about putting a name to a set of bones, it was about anchoring a legendary figure in tangible reality. Philip II was the brilliant, ruthless king who transformed Macedonia from a backward northern kingdom into the dominant military and political power in Greece, laying the essential groundwork for his son Alexander's world-altering conquest. The artifacts from his tomb provided a physical, incontrovertible link to this man and his world. The gilded armor and weapons were not mere ceremonial props. They were the actual tools of a warrior king who led from the front, bearing the scars of battle, including a famously injured eye. They revealed the advanced military technology he pioneered, such as the long-thrusting spear known as the sarissa, which would become the backbone of Alexander's undefeated phalanx. This was the armor of the man who created the army that conquered the known world. Beyond the martial splendor, the tomb's artistic treasures forced a complete reassessment of Macedonian and Hellenistic culture. The prevailing view had long been that Macedonia was a cultural backwater, a rough military state that only gained refinement through its exposure to the sophisticated art of Athens and Persia after Alexander's conquests. The Vergina finds shattered this notion. The exquisite minor arts, the delicate goldwork of the wreaths, the intricate silverware, the beautifully painted frescoes that adorned the tomb's interior, proved that Macedonian royalty patronized artists of the highest caliber long before they set foot in Asia. They had their own distinct, sophisticated aesthetic, one that blended Greek motifs with a unique northern flavor. The discovery proved that Alexander's empire did not emerge from a vacuum of brute force. It was the product of a rich, complex, and already powerful civilization, whose artistic and cultural achievements were every bit as vibrant as those of the southern Greek city-states. The impact of this single, unlooted tomb extends far beyond its golden treasures. It provided the first secure archaeological context for dating a whole class of magnificent metalwork and painting from the 4th century before the Common Era. It gave historians a fixed point from which to understand the evolution of Macedonian tomb architecture and royal burial practices. Most poignantly, it gave a physical reality to figures who had until then existed primarily in the pages of histories written by their enemies. Philip was no longer just a character in a story. He was a man who was buried with his weapons and his glory, a testament to a kingdom whose power and sophistication had been waiting patiently under a grassy mound, ready to reshape our narrative of the ancient world's most dramatic rise to power. Leaving behind the royal tombs of Macedonia, we now cross the Atlantic to the steamy jungles of the Mexican Gulf Coast, where a discovery of monumental proportions would single-handedly unearth a civilization lost to time. For centuries, the indigenous peoples of the region spoke of a race of giants who had once inhabited the land. These legends seem to find proof in the 19th century, when plantation workers and travelers began reporting sightings of enormous, helmeted stone heads, half buried in the mud and entangled in dense vegetation. Local lore dismissed them as oddities or pagan idols, their true significance completely unrecognized. It wasn't until the pioneering work of archaeologists like Matthew Stirling in the 1930s that the world began to understand the truth. These were not the works of giants, but the creation of giants among men, the Olmecs, the mother culture of Mesoamerica. The moment of revelation came as Stirling's team carefully excavated the first of these heads at the site of Tres Zapotes. As the earth was brushed away, an astonishing visage emerged, a face over 5 feet tall, carved from a single, colossal block of solid basalt, weighing anywhere from 6 to over 40 tons. The features were unmistakably and powerfully human, yet deliberately stylized, a scowling, determined expression with a broad, flat nose, thick lips, and eyes staring out from beneath the rim of a distinctive helmet or headdress. Each head was unique, a portrait of a powerful individual ruler, each with their own specific helmet ornamentation, suggesting these were monuments to actual Olmec kings, immortalized in stone to project their authority for eternity. To date, 17 of these colossal heads have been discovered across the Olmec heartland, primarily at the major centers of San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes. The sheer logistics of their creation and transport is a story of breathtaking ambition. The basalt for these monoliths did not come from local sources. The nearest quarries were in the Tuxtla Mountains, dozens of miles away from the ceremonial centers where the heads were finally erected. This meant the Olmec had to organize massive labor crews to transport these multi-ton boulders through swampy lowlands and across rivers without the use of wheels or draft animals. The prevailing theory is that they used a combination of sledges, rollers, and rafts, maneuvering the immense stones through a network of rivers and then dragging them overland, a feat requiring sophisticated engineering knowledge and a highly centralized society capable of commanding such a vast workforce. The carving itself was accomplished using only harder stone tools and water abrasion, a painstaking process that could have taken years for a single sculpture. The impact of these discoveries was nothing short of revolutionary for the understanding of the ancient Americas. Before the identification of the Olmec, the Maya were widely considered the earliest sophisticated civilization in the region. The Olmec colossal heads, along with the excavation of their sprawling ceremonial centers featuring monumental earthwork pyramids, intricate jade work, and evidence of a complex writing and calendar system, completely upended this timeline. Carbon dating firmly placed the zenith of Olmec culture between 1500 and 400 years before the Common Era, making them the earliest complex society in all of Mesoamerica. They were, in essence, the cultural wellspring from which all subsequent civilizations in the region would drink. We see the Olmec legacy etched into the very fabric of later cultures. Their mastery of jade carving and their reverence for jade as a sacred stone became a hallmark of Maya royalty. The concept of the ceremonial ball game, so central to Maya and Aztec cosmology, appears to have originated with the Olmec. Stone ball game belts and rubber balls have been found at Olmec sites. Most significantly, they appear to have been among the very first in the Americas to develop a system of writing. The Cascajal block, a serpentine slab found near San Lorenzo and dating to around 900 before the Common Era, bears 62 distinct glyphs in a pattern that suggests a true written text predating the earliest known Maya writing by several centuries. Furthermore, their intricate calendar systems and their complex mythology, featuring a word jaguar deity and a feathered serpent, a clear precursor to the Aztecs' Quetzalcoatl and the Mayas' Kukulkan, became foundational elements of Mesoamerican religion. The discovery of the Olmec colossal heads did more than just add an earlier chapter to the history books. It redefined the entire narrative. It proved that urbanization, monumental art, and complex social hierarchy in the Americas did not begin in the Maya highlands or the Zapotec Valley of Oaxaca, but on the humid Gulf Coast. The heads themselves stand as eternal sentinels to this forgotten genesis, their stoic faces challenging us to recognize the depth and antiquity of American civilization. They are a powerful testament to a people who, from the primordial swamps, built an empire of ideas and imagery that would shape a continent for 1,000 years, establishing a cultural blueprint that still echoes through the ruins of every great city that came after them. Yet while these colossal heads stood as silent monuments to a forgotten American genesis, an equally profound rediscovery was taking place on the other side of the world, in the sun-baked plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, the past wasn't just buried, it was layered, a testament to the relentless rise and fall of cities that predated history itself. For centuries, the great mounds of Mesopotamia, known as tells, were simply part of the landscape. Local inhabitants built their homes upon them, unaware that they were living atop the crumbled mud brick ruins of the world's first urban civilizations. It wasn't until the 19th century, as European powers expanded their influence into the Ottoman Empire, that these earthen hills became the focus of a new kind of treasure hunt, one that sought not gold but the very origins of human society. The initial excavations were often haphazard, driven by a desire to retrieve spectacular artifacts for the great museums of London, Paris, and Berlin. But a handful of visionary archaeologists began to see the bigger picture. They understood that these tells were not just repositories of objects, but the skeletal remains of entire cities. At the site of Uruk, German teams led by archaeologists like Julius Jordan began the painstaking process of peeling back the layers of time. What they uncovered was staggering in its age and complexity. They found the remains of a massive city with monumental architecture, including the famous White Temple, perched high on a ziggurat that dominated the flat landscape. They discovered intricate mosaics of colored clay cones and, most importantly, thousands of the earliest known written documents, clay tablets covered in the pictographic script that would evolve into cuneiform. This was the city of the legendary King Gilgamesh, and the excavations proved it was not a myth, but a powerful, sophisticated urban center that flourished around 3,200 years before the Common Era. Simultaneously, at the city of a joint expedition by the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania, led by the charismatic Leonard Woolley, captivated the world with discoveries that seemed to leap directly from the pages of the Bible. Woolley's most sensational find came in 1929 when his team dug deep into the silt beneath the city's royal cemetery. They uncovered a layer of clean, water-laid clay, nearly 10 feet thick, that separated the later levels of occupation from much earlier ones. Woolley immediately telegraphed his famous message, "We have found the flood." He had discovered evidence of a colossal inundation that had swallowed the entire southern Mesopotamian plain around 2900 before the Common Era. While this was almost certainly a regional flood event and not the global cataclysm described in Genesis, its impact on the local population would have been absolute and terrifying. For those who survived, it would have seemed as if the entire world had been wiped clean. Woolley's discovery provided a powerful historical kernel for the flood myths that appear not only in the Bible but also in the much older Epic of Gilgamesh, suggesting these stories were rooted in a shared, traumatic memory of a real environmental disaster. But the true treasure of Ur lay above the flood layer in the magnificent royal cemetery. Here, Woolley unearthed 16 incredibly rich tombs that rewrote the book on early Sumerian society. The most famous of these was the tomb of Queen Puabi, identified by a magnificent cylindrical seal bearing her name. Her burial chamber was a spectacle of wealth and horrifying ritual. The queen herself was adorned in a breathtaking headdress of gold leaves, ribbons of lapis lazuli and carnelian, and enormous golden earrings. She lay surrounded by a court of attendants who had willingly, or perhaps not, accompanied her into the afterlife. The tomb contained the bodies of soldiers, handmaidens, charioteers with their ox-drawn wagons, and even musicians, their hands still resting on their lyres, one of which, the great lyre of Ur, was decorated with a magnificent golden bull's head and panels depicting mythological scenes. This wasn't just a grave, it was a frozen moment of unimaginable royal power and belief, demonstrating a complex social hierarchy and a deeply ingrained concept of the afterlife that required such elaborate provisions. The cumulative impact of these digs at Ur, Uruk, and other sites like Nippur and Lagash was to provide a tangible, archaeological backbone for the birth of civilization. The evidence was laid out in the stratified layers of the tells like a historical textbook. The deepest layers revealed the first experiments with irrigation and agriculture. Above them were the first signs of temples and centralized authority. Then came the invention of writing, born from the practical need to administer temple economies and record transactions. Finally, the layers revealed the rise of kings, of monumental architecture, and of stunning artistic achievement. This stratified proof fundamentally altered our view of human progress. The stories of the Bible and the myths of Mesopotamia were no longer seen as mere allegories. They were reflections of a very real, sequential historical experience. These antediluvian cities proved that urbanization, writing, and complex governance did not emerge in a single divine moment, but were the hard-won products of millennia of human innovation, social organization, and adaptation to a challenging environment. They gave us the very framework for civilization itself, a blueprint that will be copied, adapted, and built upon for thousands of years to come. Yet the layered cities of Mesopotamia reveal a story of societies of collective human progress. Our next discovery zooms in with startling intimacy, revealing the life and death of a single, solitary man, preserved by chance for over 5 millennia in a frozen alpine pass. In September 1991, 2 German hikers, Helmut and Erika Simon, were trekking high in the Ötztal Alps along the border between Austria and Italy. Descending from the summit of the final Spitze, they spotted something brown protruding from the melting ice of a gully. Assuming it was the unfortunate remains of a modern mountaineer, a not uncommon find in the region, they alerted the authorities. The body was roughly chipped out of the ice with ski poles and a pneumatic drill, a recovery effort that tragically damaged the hip of the specimen and one of his tools. It was only when the body was taken to the University of Innsbruck that archaeologists realized the catastrophic error. This was no modern hiker. The copper axe found with him, the primitive bow and arrows, and the incredible preservation of his skin and clothing pointed to something far more ancient. They had accidentally discovered the oldest naturally preserved human mummy in the world, a man who would soon be known to the world as Ötzi the Iceman. Radiocarbon dating would later confirm that Ötzi lived and died around 3,300 years before the Common Era during the European Copper Age. He was not buried, he had simply lain down in a shallow depression in the rock, perhaps exhausted or seeking shelter from a storm, and never got up. A shift in the climate soon after his death covered him in snow and ice, which remained permanent until the unusual summer melt of 1991 revealed him to the modern world. This unique mode of preservation created an unparalleled time capsule. Unlike the carefully prepared mummies of Egypt, Ötzi was frozen in the exact moment of his death, with all his everyday belongings surrounding him. He was not a king or a pharaoh, he was an ordinary man, and that is precisely what makes him so extraordinarily valuable to history. The inventory of his equipment provides a stunningly complete picture of Copper Age technology and survival strategy. He was remarkably well prepared for high-altitude travel. His clothing was a sophisticated layered system, including a belt, loincloth, and leggings made of goat and sheep leather, a coat of woven grasses for insulation, and a bearskin hat with a chin strap. His footwear was particularly ingenious: sturdy shoes made of bearskin for the soles, deerskin for the uppers, and a net of grass cordage stuffed with soft hay for warmth and moisture wicking, essentially functioning as prehistoric hiking boots. His tools reveal a multi-skilled individual. He carried an unfinished yew longbow taller than he was, a quiver of arrows with flint and dogwood points, a copper axe with a haft of yew wood, a priceless item indicating high status, a small flint dagger with an ash wood handle, a retoucher for sharpening tools, and a birch bark container that likely held embers for starting fires, wrapped in maple leaves to keep them smoldering. This was not a primitive savage, this was a technologically adept, highly resourceful man, perfectly adapted to his environment. But the real revolution in understanding came from the man himself. Ötzi's body is a medical and biological archive. CT scans and modern genomic sequencing have revealed an astonishingly detailed biography. He was about 45 years old, 5 feet 3 inches tall, and weighed around 110 pounds. He had brown eyes, type O blood, was lactose intolerant, and had a genetic predisposition for arteriosclerosis, which was already evident in his arteries. His stomach contents revealed his last meals: first, ibex meat and grains, followed by red deer meat, possibly smoked, and ancient einkorn wheat, all consumed with traces of fern leaves, which might have been used to wrap the food or had medicinal purposes. He was also infested with whipworm, an intestinal parasite. Perhaps most astonishingly, his body is a map of a hard life. His lungs were blackened by soot from open fires, his joints showed signs of wear, and he had numerous tattoos, not for decoration but for therapy. These small, cross-shaped groups of lines, made by rubbing charcoal into incisions, were located precisely on areas of his body that showed evidence of degenerative joint disease, such as his lower back, wrists, knees, and ankles. This suggests a form of prehistoric acupuncture or pain relief treatment, a sophisticated understanding of the body that we never knew existed. The final chapter of Ötzi's story is the most dramatic: his cause of death. Initially, it was believed he succumbed to exposure after being caught in a storm. This theory was overturned a decade after his discovery, when an X-ray revealed a flint arrowhead embedded deep in his left shoulder. Ötzi had been murdered. Further forensic analysis painted a vivid and violent picture of his last hours. The arrow severed a major artery, causing a slow, painful death from blood loss and shock. He also had a deep cut on his hand between his thumb and index finger, a defensive wound consistent with a knife fight that occurred just days before his death. DNA analysis revealed the blood of 4 other people on his gear, 1 on his knife, 2 on the same arrowhead that killed him, and a 4th on his coat. The story that emerges is one of a brutal, running battle. Ötzi was involved in a violent confrontation, perhaps killing at least one of his attackers with his arrow. Wounded in the hand, he fled up the mountain, pursued by his enemies. One of them caught up to him and shot him in the back with an arrow from a distance. Ötzi managed to break off the arrow shaft but could not remove the deadly point. He bled to death alone on the pass, his body quickly covered by snow, preserving this ancient crime scene for 5,300 years. Ötzi is more than a mummy. He is a window into the daily reality of the prehistoric world, a world that was technologically advanced, medically aware, and, as his death so poignantly proves, as fraught with human conflict and tragedy as our own. For centuries, the city of Troy existed in a shimmering space between myth and memory. The epic tales of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey told of a magnificent, fortified city besieged for 10 years by a Greek army, all over the abduction of the beautiful Helen. It was a story of gods and heroes, of the cunning Trojan horse and the tragic Achilles. To the scholarly world of the 19th century, it was just that, a brilliant story, a foundational work of literature, but not a literal history. The city of Priam and Hector was considered a poetic invention, a fictional backdrop for a grand moral drama. This academic certainty, however, meant nothing to a German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann, a man possessed by a childhood dream and an unshakable, almost fanatical, belief that Homer's songs were true. Schliemann was a romantic and a prodigious autodidact, a self-made millionaire who had made his fortune in indigo and the California gold rush. He retired from business in his 40s to pursue his true obsession, finding Troy. He learned ancient and modern Greek and devoured the classical texts, using Homer's descriptions as his literal treasure map. Unlike the academics of his day, he took the Iliad at its word. In 1871, he arrived in northwestern Turkey and focused his efforts on a large mound called Hisarlik. Local tradition had long associated the site with ancient Troy, but previous investigators had been unconvinced. Schliemann, with his immense personal wealth and relentless drive, began digging on a scale never before seen in archaeology. He was not a careful scientist. He was a man in a hurry to prove a point, and his methods were brutally direct. He hired hundreds of local workers and had them carve a gigantic, deep trench straight through the center of the mound, ruthlessly demolishing later layers of occupation in his quest to reach the Homeric city at the bottom. This destructive haste would later be condemned as an archaeological catastrophe, but in 1873 it seemed to yield spectacular results. Schliemann and his wife, Sophia, uncovered a fabulous hoard of gold and precious objects, exquisite jewelry, diadems, golden goblets, and thousands of gold beads. Convinced he had found the treasure of King Priam himself, Schliemann famously had Sophia pose for photographs wearing a magnificent headdress of golden chains and pendants, known ever since as the Jewels of Helen. In a moment of pure theatrical triumph, he declared to the world that he had gazed upon the face of Agamemnon, though the artifacts were millennia older than any possible historical Agamemnon. He had, in fact, tunneled down to a layer far older than the Homeric Bronze Age, a city now known as Troy II, which dated to around 2500 before the Common Era. In his zeal, he had destroyed a significant portion of the actual Homeric city, Troy 6 or 7, which lay above it. The scholarly backlash was immediate and severe. Professional archaeologists rightly criticized Schliemann for his reckless methods, his sensationalism, and his tendency to interpret every find through the narrow lens of the Homeric epics. He was accused of salting the site with artifacts from elsewhere and of combining finds from different layers to create his Priam's treasure. Yet for all his flaws and destructive enthusiasm, Schliemann had achieved something profound. He had forced the academic world to take myth seriously. By demonstrating that there was a real, wealthy, and fortified Bronze Age city exactly where tradition had always placed Troy, he shattered the prevailing dogma that the Homeric tales were pure fantasy. His work, followed by more meticulous excavations by his successor Wilhelm Dörpfeld, revealed that Hisarlik was not one city but 9, built layer upon layer over thousands of years. One of these layers, Troy 7a, showed clear evidence of violent destruction by fire and warfare around the generally accepted date for the Trojan War, around 1180 before the Common Era. The city had massive walls that fit Homer's description of strong-built Troy, and its location perfectly matched the strategic importance described in the epics, controlling the entrance to the Dardanelles and the lucrative trade routes between the Aegean and the Black Sea. The true legacy of Schliemann's discovery, therefore, is not the treasure he unearthed, but the paradigm shift he ignited. He pioneered the idea that ancient myths and oral traditions could be repositories of historical memory, passed down through generations of storytellers before being written down. The story of the Trojan War, with its specific details of geography, warfare, and material culture, began to look less like invention and more like a poetic retelling of a real, catastrophic conflict from the late Bronze Age, a war perhaps fought not over a single woman, but over trade, prestige, and control of a critical waterway. Schliemann's crude trench opened the door to a new kind of archaeology, one that seeks to blend the textual and the material to reconstruct a more complete past. He proved that behind the veil of legend there often lies a kernel of truth, waiting for someone determined enough and perhaps reckless enough to go digging for it. Yet the story of Troy reminds us that even the most persistent legends can hold a kernel of truth, a reality we also find not in the soil, but on the fragile pages of a book that should never have survived. For centuries, the intellectual achievements of the Maya were shrouded in an impenetrable mist, a direct result of one of history's most devastating acts of cultural erasure. In the 16th century, Spanish friars, led by the zealous Bishop Diego de Landa, systematically gathered and burned thousands of Maya codices, beautiful, screenfold books written on bark paper and coated with fine lime plaster. De Landa considered these texts, which he could not read, to be the work of the devil, lies of the devil that had to be purged to save the souls of the converted Maya. In a single, catastrophic auto-da-fe in the Yucatan town of Mani, an entire library of indigenous knowledge, science, and history was reduced to ashes. For generations, the Western world believed the Maya had no substantial written tradition, viewing them as a primitive people despite their magnificent stone cities. This perception would stand unchallenged until a singular, miraculous survivor resurfaced in an unlikely place, the Royal Library in Dresden, Germany. How this Maya book, now known as the Dresden Codex, made its 5,000-mile journey from the jungles of the Yucatan to the heart of Europe remains one of history's quiet mysteries. The most likely path involves a Spanish conquistador or a missionary sending it back to the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V as a curiosity around the year 1519. It eventually entered the collection of the Royal Library in Dresden in the 1730s, where it was catalogued for its exotic appearance, but its contents remained a complete and utter enigma. For decades, it was simply an artifact, a beautiful but silent object. Its true value and its earth-shattering message would only be unlocked when a brilliant, driven 23-year-old royal librarian named Ernst Wilhelm Förstemann dedicated his life to breaking its code in the late 19th century. Förstemann was armed with two key pieces of the puzzle. First, he had the physical codex itself, 74 pages of meticulously painted glyphs and numbers, a complex tapestry of deities, animals, and intricate tables. Second, he had the seminal work of Diego de Landa himself, the very man who had ordered the burning of the books. In a profound historical irony, de Landa had later written a book, Relación de los Cosas de Yucatán, in which he attempted to record the Maya alphabet as it had been explained to him by a native informant. This de Landa alphabet was clumsy and inaccurate. He had fundamentally misunderstood the logosyllabic nature of Maya writing, trying to force it into a European alphabetic model, but it provided Förstemann with a crucial starting point, a Rosetta Stone of sorts. Förstemann's breakthrough was to ignore the glyphs initially and focus solely on the numbers. The Dresden Codex is filled with dots and bars, a simple, elegant decimal-based 20 numbering system where a dot represents 1 and a bar represents 5. He noticed these numbers appeared in meticulous, repeating tables. With painstaking patience, he began to calculate. He discovered that these were not simple lists. They were sophisticated astronomical calendars tracking cycles of breathtaking complexity and accuracy. The most stunning of these was a table that perfectly charted the synodic period of the planet Venus, the 584 days it takes for Venus to return to the same position in the sky from Earth's perspective. The Maya had calculated this cycle to an accuracy of just 1 day in 500 years. This was not primitive stargazing. This was precision astronomy on a par with anything being done in Europe at the time, achieved centuries earlier. But the Codex revealed more than just math. It was a complete guide to Maya cosmology, a ritual almanac that integrated their celestial observations with their religious worldview. The Venus table was not just a scientific chart, it was a divinatory tool. The Maya believed the appearance of Venus as the morning or evening star was an inauspicious event, associated with the god Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl to the Aztecs and portending war, drought, and misfortune. The Codex provided priests with the precise dates of these appearances, allowing them to perform the necessary ceremonies to ward off disaster. Other pages detailed complex rituals tied to the 260-day sacred calendar, the Tzolk'in, and its interplay with the 365-day solar year, the Hob, creating the 52-year calendar round. Perhaps most astonishingly, it contained tables for predicting solar eclipses and charts for the cycles of the moon, demonstrating a nuanced understanding of celestial mechanics that was both scientifically advanced and deeply enmeshed in spiritual practice. The decoding of the Dresden Codex by Firsteman and subsequent scholars like Yuri Norisov, who finally cracked the phonetic elements of the script in the 1950s, fundamentally rewrote the history of the Americas. It proved that the Maya possessed one of the most sophisticated intellectual traditions of the ancient world. They were not just artists and architects, they were mathematicians, astronomers, and historians who had developed a complete writing system capable of recording their complex ideas. The Codex single-handedly dismantled the colonial narrative of indigenous inferiority, revealing a civilization whose scientific achievements had been systematically and deliberately destroyed. This one surviving book, a lone voice whispering from the ashes of a cultural holocaust, stands as a permanent testament to the devastating cost of conquest and the incredible, resilient power of human knowledge, patiently waiting centuries for someone to finally listen and understand. After the global sweep of ancient mysteries from the jungles of Mesoamerica to the icy peaks of the Alps, our next discovery brings us to a much more familiar, yet no less astonishing, setting, a quiet farm field in the English countryside. It was a typical November day in 1992 in the village of Hoxney in Suffolk. Eric Laws, a retired gardener and amateur metal detectorist, was out in a field helping a farmer look for a lost hammer. As he swept his detector over the soil, he received an impossibly strong signal. Expecting to find a few old coins or perhaps the missing tool, he dug down a few inches. His trowel scraped against metal, but it wasn't a hammer. It was a tarnished silver spoon, and then another, and then he saw a glimpse of gold. Realizing the staggering scale of his find, Eric Laws did something remarkably responsible. He stopped digging immediately, covered the spot back over, and contacted the local archaeological authorities. This single act of integrity would preserve one of the most significant archaeological contexts ever found in Britain, allowing experts to carefully excavate what would be known as the Hoxney Hoard. What the archaeologists uncovered was a breathtaking time capsule from the very end of Roman rule in Britain. The treasure was not scattered loosely in the ground, but was found nestled within a decayed wooden chest and several smaller caskets. The main chest had been packed with incredible care. The contents were a symphony of wealth and daily life frozen in a moment of panic. there were over 15,000 gold and silver coins minted by emperors spanning over a century. There were dozens of exquisite silver spoons and ladles, many beautifully engraved with Christian motifs like the Cairo symbol, suggesting the owner was a convert to the new state religion. There were over 200 pieces of stunning gold jewelry, including necklaces, rings, and elaborate body chains worn by wealthy Roman women. There were pepper pots, including the famous and witty Empress Pepper Pot, a hollow silver figure of a high-born lady that functioned as a dispenser for the precious spice. There were silver bowls, cups, and vase handles, all of high-quality craftsmanship. Every item spoke of immense personal wealth, refined taste, and a life of luxury that was about to be violently disrupted. The true power of the Hoxne hoard lies not just in its beauty, but in the precise story it tells about its burial. The latest coins in the collection date to the reigns of Emperors Honorius and Constantine III, placing the act of concealment right around 410 of the Common Era. This was a moment of profound and terrifying change. Roman legions had been steadily withdrawn from Britain to defend the crumbling heart of the empire in Italy from Gothic invasions. The official Roman administration was collapsing, leaving the wealthy Romano-British elite suddenly vulnerable and alone. Barbarian tribes, Saxons, Angles, and Jutes, were raiding the coastlines, and internal power struggles were tearing the province apart. The person who buried this treasure, likely a wealthy landowner or a high-ranking official, was almost certainly fleeing for their life. They carefully packed their most valuable portable wealth, hid it in the ground, and fully intended to return when the danger had passed. That they never did is one of history's poignant silences. Their fate is unknown, but their treasure remained hidden in the Suffolk soil for 1,580 years. For historians, the hoard is an unparalleled window into the economy, craftsmanship, and social structure of late Roman Britain. The sheer weight of precious metal confirms that despite the political chaos at the top, the province remained exceptionally wealthy. The coins allow experts to trace the flow of currency and the economic policies of different emperors with stunning clarity. The craftsmanship of the jewelry and tableware, much of it made from gilded silver and intricately decorated with niello, a black sulfurous alloy used for inlay, proves that British silversmiths were master artisans operating at a level equal to any in the empire. The inclusion of everyday yet luxurious items like pepper pots and grape sieves speaks to a sophisticated palate and access to long-distance trade networks, even as the world seemed to be falling apart. This was not the stash of a state treasury. It was the personal property of a family, a collection built over generations and representing their entire social and financial identity. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Hoxne hoard is the precedent it set for the relationship between metal detectorists and archaeologists. Eric Laws was promptly and fairly rewarded for his discovery, sharing a finder's fee of £1.75 million with the landowner. More importantly, his responsible actions demonstrated that amateur enthusiasts, far from being the looters archaeologists often feared, could be crucial partners in discovery. The careful excavation of the hoard provided a perfect model for how such finds should be handled. The success of Hoxne led directly to the reform of British treasure law, culminating in the 1996 Treasure Act, which encourages finders to report discoveries so they can be properly recorded and acquired by museums for the public benefit. The Hoxne hoard did more than just reshape our understanding of the end of Roman Britain. It reshaped the very practice of uncovering history, proving that sometimes the most valuable thing you can find with a metal detector isn't gold or silver, but a new way for the past to speak to the present. While Eric Laws's responsible actions preserved a detailed snapshot of Roman Britain's final days, another discovery made centuries earlier was initially dismissed precisely because it was too incredible to be believed. Our journey now takes us to the rolling green hills of northern Spain, to a place where the boundary between art and archaeology was forever blurred. In the late 19th century, a landowner and amateur archaeologist named Marcelino Sanz de Sottuola was exploring a cave on his property near the town of Santillana del Mar. Accompanied by his young daughter, Maria, he was searching for artifacts and fossils. While the father meticulously scanned the floor of the cave, it was the child, with a low vantage point and untethered curiosity, who looked up. In the flickering light of her lantern, she saw them first. "Look, Papa," she is famously reported to have cried. Oxen. What she had spotted were not oxen, but a breathtaking, sprawling ceiling of art. The vault of the cave was covered in magnificent polychrome paintings of bison, their bodies rendered in vibrant reds and blacks, their forms so lifelike they seemed to breathe in the dim light. They were depicted in dynamic poses, standing, resting, bellowing, and rolling on the ground. Alongside them were paintings of wild boar, horses, and handprints, creating a vibrant bestiary from a lost world. Marcelino Sanz de Sottuola was astounded. He immediately recognized that the art was ancient, and in 1880, he published a brief pamphlet suggesting that these stunning paintings were the work of prehistoric people from the Paleolithic era. The scientific community's reaction was not just skeptical, it was brutally dismissive. Leading French prehistorians, the absolute authorities in the nascent field of Paleolithic studies, declared the paintings an obvious fraud. Their reasoning was rooted in a deeply entrenched and condescending view of human progress. How could so-called primitive cavemen, who were believed to be little more than brutish hunters struggling for survival, possess such advanced artistic skill, such an understanding of perspective, anatomy, and color? The sophistication of the Altamira paintings completely contradicted the linear, progressive model of human cultural evolution that was popular at the time. The experts concluded that Sottuola must have hired a modern artist to forge them, perhaps to bring fame and tourists to his region. Some even accused him of being influenced by his daughter's vivid imagination. The weight of this professional scorn was crippling, and Sottuola died in 1888, a disgraced man who never lived to see his name vindicated. The vindication would come over a decade later, and from the very heart of the scientific establishment that had rejected him. As more Paleolithic caves were discovered in France, notably at La Mouth and Les Combarelles, they were found to contain engravings and paintings that, while often less spectacularly polychrome than those at Altamira, were undeniably ancient, as they were found buried under layers of sediment that contained Paleolithic tools. The final proof came in 1902 when Emile Cartelhac, one of Sottuola's most prominent and vocal detractors, published a landmark paper titled "Mea culpa d'un sceptique," a skeptic's mea culpa. He publicly apologized for his error and acknowledged the prehistoric authenticity of Altamira. Science had finally caught up to the truth that a little girl and her father had seen so clearly. The acceptance of Altamira's antiquity triggered a revolution in our understanding of early humanity. It forced a complete abandonment of the simplistic, linear view of cultural progress. These paintings, created over 14,000 years ago, proved that the human capacity for symbolic thought, artistic expression, and spiritual inquiry was not a recent development. It was fundamental to our species from its very early chapters. The artists of Altamira were not primitive, they were masters. They understood the natural contours of the cave ceiling, using its bulges and dips to give their paintings a shocking three-dimensional quality. They created their paints from natural pigments like ochre, charcoal, and manganese, mixed with binders like animal fat or water. They employed techniques like engraving, painting, and airbrushing paint by blowing it through a hollow bone to create soft shading. This was not doodling, it was a highly sophisticated, tradition-bound sacred art. The purpose of this art remains one of prehistory's great mysteries, but the most compelling theories point to a deep spiritual or shamanistic function. The main chamber at Altamira, now called the polychrome ceiling, is not a living space. It is a deep, special part of the cave, difficult to access. It was likely a sanctuary, a place where initiates were brought for rituals. The act of painting may have been a form of sympathetic magic, an attempt to gain power over the animals they hunted, to ensure a successful hunt and the fertility of the herd. Or perhaps the cave was seen as a portal to the spirit world, and the artists were shamans who journeyed into the darkness to commune with the animal spirits, returning to paint their visions on the stone. The art of Altamira is a powerful, silent sermon from our deepest past, a declaration that humanity's need to create, to beautify, and to seek meaning in the world is as ancient as we are, a brilliant and permanent counter-argument to any notion of our gradual ascent from brute ignorance. While the Hoxne hoard offered a time capsule of Roman life buried in terror, our next discovery lay hidden not in soil but beneath the sea, waiting for the modern world to develop the technology to find it. For over 1,000 years, the city of Thonis-Heracleion was little more than a legend, a whisper in the histories of Herodotus and a footnote in the stories of Helen of Troy and Paris, who were said to have visited the city before the Trojan War. Scholars knew it must have been a major port, a gateway to Egypt for Greek traders, but its exact location and even its very existence had faded into myth. The Nile Delta is a vast, shifting landscape of silt and water, and the great city was presumed lost forever, swallowed by the earth and the sea. That all changed in the year 2000 when a determined French underwater archaeologist named Frank Gaudiot, after years of systematic geophysical surveys, finally pinpointed its resting place. Lying 30 feet beneath the surface of the Mediterranean, off the coast of Egypt in Aboukir Bay, was not just a shipwreck or a few scattered columns, but an entire, sprawling metropolis. The moment Gaudiot's team descended into the murky waters, they were met with a sight that defied belief. It was as if the city had been frozen in time by a sudden cataclysm. The seabed was a vast archaeological canvas, littered with the breathtaking remains of a glorious past. Colossal statues of pharaohs and queens, some towering over 16 feet tall, lay toppled on the ocean floor as if felled by a giant's hand. Grand temples with hieroglyph-covered walls emerged from the sediment. Dozens of ancient ships were entombed in their final moorings in the city's harbors, their wooden hulls preserved by the thick clay that encased them. There were stone sarcophagi for the sacred animals of the gods, countless gold coins and delicate jewelry, and towering stone stelae edicts carved by the pharaohs themselves. The most significant of these, a black granite slab over 6 feet tall, was inscribed with a decree from Pharaoh Nectanebo I in the 4th century before the Common Era. Crucially, it named the city in both Egyptian and Greek. It was Thonis to the Egyptians, Heracleion to the Greeks. This one stone confirmed that the two names referred to the same, very real place, solving a riddle that had puzzled historians for centuries. The story of its destruction is a geological one. The city was built on the unstable clay and silt of the Nile Delta. Over centuries, a combination of rising sea levels, subsiding soil, and perhaps a sudden, catastrophic trigger like an earthquake or a massive flood from the Nile, caused the entire foundation of the city to liquefy. The buildings, statues, and temples, all constructed from heavy stone, simply sank into the waterlogged ground and were swallowed by the Mediterranean Sea, most likely around the 8th century of the Common Era. This disaster, while tragic for its inhabitants, created an incredible time capsule. The thick layer of sediment that covered the ruins protected them from the eroding force of the waves and oxygen, preserving organic materials like wood and delicate artifacts in a state of remarkable condition for over a millennium. The sheer diversity of the finds has completely reshaped our understanding of the relationship between ancient Egypt and the Greek world. Thonis-Heracleion was not an isolated Egyptian port. It was a vibrant, international hub of commerce and cultural exchange. The artifacts tell a story of profound interconnection. A magnificent statue of the god Tepe, the Egyptian deity of the Nile flood, was discovered alongside a beautifully crafted Greek crater, a large vase used for mixing wine and water at symposia. Egyptian-style statues were found bearing Greek inscriptions, and Greek coins rested beside Egyptian amulets. This was a city where cultures met, traded, and co-mingled. Before its discovery, the extent of Greek influence and presence in Egypt before the founding of Alexandria was poorly understood. Thonis-Heracleion proves that for centuries, this was the mandatory port of entry for all Greek trade ships heading into Egypt. Here, Greek merchants would have their goods inspected and taxed by Egyptian officials before being allowed to sail up the canopic branch of the Nile to the city of Naucratis, another Greek trading post. The discoveries from the sunken city reveal a society that was both deeply Egyptian and increasingly cosmopolitan. The presence of massive temples dedicated to the god Amun-Jereb and his son Khonsu, along with evidence of the intricate rituals that took place there, shows that the city was a major religious center. Yet, the everyday objects pulled from the sea, Greek drinking vessels, weights and measures from different systems, and the remains of ships from across the Mediterranean paint a picture of a bustling, noisy, and diverse waterfront. The excavation of 64 ships from the city's harbors has provided an unparalleled look into ancient naval architecture, revealing vessel types that were previously only known from ancient texts. Frank Godio's work at Thonis-Heracleion, which continues to this day, is more than just a recovery mission. It is the resurrection of a lost world. Each artifact raised from the seabed is a new sentence in a chapter of history we thought was closed forever. The city forces us to redraw the map of the ancient Mediterranean, placing a colossal, wealthy emporium right at the mouth of the Nile. It proves that the boundaries between civilizations were far more porous than we imagined, filled with dialogue, mutual influence, and a shared human drive for connection and trade. The silent, watery grave of Thonis-Heracleion has given back a voice to a golden age of exchange, reminding us that even the greatest of cities can vanish beneath the waves, but their secrets never truly die. Moving from the watery resurrection of a sunken trading hub, we now journey inland to the arid cliffs of Upper Egypt, where a different kind of discovery would shake the very foundations of religious history. It was December 1945, near the town of Nag Hammadi. Two brothers, Muhammad and Khalifa Ali, were digging for fertile soil at the base of the Jabal al-Tarif cliffs to use as fertilizer. As Muhammad's mattock struck something hard, he unearthed not a rock, but a large, sealed earthenware jar nearly a meter tall. Fearful that a jinn or evil spirit might be trapped inside, he almost left it alone. But the thought of hidden gold overcame his superstition. With a cautious swing of his mattock, he broke the jar open. Instead of gold, a cascade of old, leather-bound books or codices tumbled out into the sand. Disappointed, the brothers gathered them up and eventually brought them home, where their mother, frustrated by a difficult day, used some of the brittle pages to kindle the oven fire. This act of domestic practicality would unknowingly incinerate a small portion of one of the most significant literary finds of the 20th century. The surviving books, 12 in total plus some leaves from a 13th, eventually found their way into the hands of scholars and antiquities dealers. They were written in Coptic, the final stage of the ancient Egyptian language, but experts soon realized they were translations of much older Greek texts. These were not orthodox Christian scriptures. They were something far more mysterious and explosive, a collection of 52 texts that would come to be known as the Nag Hammadi Library or the Gnostic Gospels. The most famous among them included the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and the Secret Revelation of John. These were not narratives of Jesus' life and death like the canonical Gospels. Instead, they were collections of secret sayings, mystical revelations, and philosophical treatises that presented a radically different vision of early Christianity, one that had been ruthlessly suppressed and thought to be lost forever. These texts were the sacred scriptures of a movement known as Gnosticism, from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. But this was not intellectual knowledge. It was a profound, intuitive, and salvific knowledge of the divine. Gnosticism presented a complex and dualistic view of the universe. It taught that the material world was not created by a supreme, benevolent God, but by a lesser, ignorant, and often malicious deity known as the Demiurge, whom some texts identified with the God of the Old Testament. Human beings, however, possessed within them a divine spark of the true, ultimate, and unknowable God that had become trapped in this flawed material existence. The path to salvation, therefore, was not through faith or good works alone, but through awakening to this inner divine spark, this gnosis, and freeing the spirit from the prison of the physical body and the world. This worldview completely recontextualizes the figure of Jesus presented in these texts. In the Gospel of Thomas, for instance, Jesus is not the suffering Savior who dies for humanity's sins. He is a cryptic wisdom teacher, a spiritual guide who reveals the secrets of the universe to his disciples. The text opens with the line, "These are the secret sayings that the living Jesus spoke and Didymos Judas Thomas recorded." It then presents 114 sayings, many of which are puzzling and paradoxical, such as, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." This paints a picture of a Christianity focused on internal enlightenment and self-discovery, rather than ecclesiastical authority and doctrine. Other texts in the collection further illuminate this alternative Christian landscape. The Gospel of Philip uses poetic and mystical language to discuss Christian sacraments and offers a famous, though often misunderstood, reference to Mary Magdalene as Jesus' companion, whom he loved more than all the disciples and used to kiss her often on the mouth. This was not necessarily a statement of romantic relationship, but more likely a metaphor for the transfer of gnosis or spiritual truth. The Apocryphon of John presents a vast and intricate creation myth, detailing the fall of the divine Sophia wisdom and the arrogant creation of the material world by the demiurge Ildabaoth, who arrogantly declares, "I am God and there is no other God beside me." The discovery of these texts forced a dramatic and uncomfortable reassessment of early Christian history. For centuries, the Orthodox Church fathers like Irenaeus of Lyons and Tertullian had written polemics against these heresies, but their arguments were all we had from the Gnostic side. Now we had the actual source material. The Nag Hammadi library revealed that the first few centuries after Jesus' death were not a period of unified belief waiting for a single church structure to emerge. Instead, it was a vibrant, chaotic, and fiercely competitive marketplace of ideas. Various groups, Gnostics, Marcionites, Ebionites, and the Proto-Orthodox Church that would eventually become mainstream were all vying for dominance, each with their own interpretations of Jesus' message and their own sets of scriptures. The eventual victory of what we now call Orthodox Christianity was not inevitable. It was the result of a long, hard-fought battle of ideas, political maneuvering, and the consolidation of institutional power. The Nag Hammadi texts show us what was lost in that process. They represent a path not taken, a form of Christianity that was more mystical, more intellectually adventurous, and more focused on personal spiritual experience than on creeds and hierarchies. Their suppression was so effective that for over 1,500 years, the history of Christianity was written solely by the winners. The chance discovery by those two Egyptian farmers cracked that monolithic narrative wide open, giving a voice to the losers and proving that the origins of the world's largest religion are far more complex, diverse, and fascinating than anyone had ever dared to imagine. Imagine a civilization so advanced, so artistically daring, that its very existence was completely erased from history, not by conquest or disaster, but simply by the passage of time. This wasn't a lost city in the desert or a sunken temple beneath the waves. It was a culture that thrived in the very heart of what we now call China, yet it left no mention in the ancient texts, no clear lineage in the archaeological record. Its rediscovery began not with a grand expedition, but with a humble farmer's shovel. In the spring of 1986, workers at a brick factory in the Sichuan province were digging clay near the town of Guanghan. Their shovels struck something hard and metallic, something that was decidedly not clay. What they had unearthed was the first glimpse of a treasure trove that would utterly shatter the conventional narrative of Chinese civilization. This was the discovery of the Sanxingdui sacrificial pits, and the artifacts they held were unlike anything ever seen before. As archaeologists rushed to the site and began a careful excavation, the sheer scale of the find became apparent. They uncovered two massive pits, meticulously laid out and packed with thousands of objects that had been ritually broken, burned, and buried. But it wasn't the quantity that was astounding, it was the quality and the utterly bizarre nature of the artifacts. This was not the familiar, elegant bronze work of the Shang dynasty, with its intricate Taoti masks and ritual wine vessels. This was something entirely other. The most breathtaking finds were the colossal bronze masks and heads, some with grotesquely exaggerated features. There were faces with eyes that protruded like telescopes, some with ears that stretched out like giant wings, and others with mouths that seemed to grin with a mysterious, supernatural knowledge. Then came the showstopper, a towering bronze figure standing over 8 feet tall, dressed in an elaborate embroidered robe, its hands held in a curiously clenched circle as if it once held some immense sacred object. This was no mere statue, it was a commanding, priestly presence. The technological mastery on display was breathtaking. These weren't simple castings. The Sanxingdui artisans employed a sophisticated piece mold casting technique to create objects of staggering size and complexity, a feat that required an incredible understanding of metallurgy and teamwork. They worked on a scale that was unprecedented. The bronze sacred tree, carefully reconstructed from fragments, stretched over 13 feet high, featuring birds, fruit, and a coiling dragon, representing a cosmic tree connecting heaven and earth. Alongside the bronze were items of gold, including a stunning gold staff and a unique gold mask so thin and finely crafted it could have been pressed from a sheet of foil. The society that produced these objects was not a peripheral backwater. It was a wealthy, powerful, and deeply sophisticated kingdom, a peer to the Shang dynasty, not a subject. This is what makes Sanxingdui so revolutionary. For centuries, Chinese history was understood through a central Yellow River paradigm, a linear progression from the Xia to the Shang and then to the Zhou dynasties, with other cultures existing only on the periphery as less advanced barbarian states. Sanxingdui exploded that idea completely. Here was evidence of a spectacular, technologically equal, but artistically distinct civilization flourishing 1,200 years before the Common Era in the Sichuan Basin, 1,000 miles away from the Shang capital at Anyang. It proved that ancient China was not a single, monolithic culture evolving in isolation. It was a vibrant tapestry of multiple, complex societies, each with its own unique religious beliefs, artistic styles, and political structures. The Shang were not the only game in town. They had a brilliant, mysterious rival in the West. The great enigma of Sanxingdui is that we still have no idea who these people were. They left no written records, and their culture appears to have vanished as suddenly and mysteriously as it appeared. The most prevalent theory is that they were the kingdom of Shu, mentioned in later legends but never before confirmed. Why they deliberately destroyed their most sacred objects and buried them in pits remains a subject of fierce debate. Was it an act of ritual decommissioning? Were they preparing to flee an imminent threat, perhaps an earthquake that altered the course of their river? We may never know. The silent, staring bronzes of Sanxingdui refused to give up their secrets. They stand as a powerful testament to the fact that history is not a completed puzzle, but a vast and mysterious landscape where entire worlds can still be discovered, forcing us to humbly rewrite everything we thought we knew. Yet while the silent bronzes of Sanxingdui spoke of a civilization lost to history, our next journey takes us across the globe to a windswept, remote coastline where a different kind of mystery was hiding in plain sight. For centuries, the Icelandic sagas, epic tales written in the 13th century, spoke of a daring Viking explorer named Leif Erikson and a land he called Vinland, a place of wild grapes and gentle shores west of Greenland. To most historians, these stories were just that, stories, semi-mythical accounts of a fleeting, failed attempt at exploration. The idea that Norse sailors had reached North America some 500 years before Columbus was considered a patriotic Scandinavian fantasy, an intriguing legend with no basis in archaeological fact. That all changed in the 1960s when a determined Norwegian explorer couple, Helge and Anne Stein Ingstad, decided to take the sagas at their word and went looking for a ghost. Their search was a methodical process of elimination, combing the northeastern coast of North America from New England up to Labrador. They were looking for a specific description from the sagas, a place with a shallow, narrow inlet for beaching ships, with grasslands suitable for pasture, and a climate that could support the wild grapes Leif Erikson supposedly found. In 1960, their quest led them to the northernmost tip of Newfoundland, to a place called Epaves Bay by the local fishermen. The French name meant Bay of Wrecks, but the Ingstad saw something else entirely, a perfect sheltered cove that matched the saga descriptions exactly. What they found on the ground was even more compelling. The local people pointed them towards some overgrown grassy humps and ridges near the shore, known locally as the Old Indian Camp. But to Helge Ingstad, an experienced Arctic explorer, these mounds looked eerily familiar. They were not natural, they were the unmistakable outlines of Norse longhouse foundations, identical to those he had excavated in Greenland and Iceland. The following summer, the Ingstads assembled an international team and began to dig. Almost immediately, their shovels confirmed what they had dared to hope. They uncovered the clear, carbon-rich remains of walls made of turf, laid out in a distinctively Norse style. They found a bronze cloak pin, a stone lamp, a whetstone for sharpening tools, and a small spindle whorl used for spinning wool, an object that silently testified to the presence of women, suggesting this was not just a camp for explorers but a small, attempted settlement. Most decisively, they found the smoking gun, a Norse-style forge and smithy, complete with slag from ironworking. This was a technology far beyond the capabilities of the local Dorset or Beothuk peoples at that time. Radiocarbon dating of charcoal from the fireplaces placed the occupation squarely around the year 1000 of the Common Era, exactly the time when Leif Erikson was said to have made his voyage. The site, named Elant's Ox Meadows, was a revelation. It consisted of 8 buildings, including 3 large multi-roomed longhouses, several smaller dwellings and workshops, all strategically positioned on a narrow terrace overlooking the bay. The longhouses were built with sturdy walls of sod stacked over a wooden frame, designed to withstand the harsh North Atlantic winds. This was a base camp, a place for overwintering and for making repairs to ships before the return voyage across the treacherous strait to Greenland. The discovery was immediately recognized as one of the most significant in New World archaeology. In 1978, UNESCO designated it a World Heritage Site, the first and only confirmed Norse site in North America. The impact of this discovery was immediate and profound. It irrevocably rewrote the history of transoceanic contact. Christopher Columbus was dethroned from his position as the sole discoverer of America. His 1992 voyage now understood as a spectacular rediscovery that inaugurated lasting contact rather than the first arrival. It validated the Viking sagas not as pure myth, but as repositories of genuine historical memory, preserving details of real voyages across an incredibly dangerous ocean. Elant's Ox Meadows proved that medieval European sailors possessed the seafaring technology, the navigational skill, and the sheer raw courage to cross the North Atlantic intentionally and establish a foothold on a new continent. But the site tells a more complex story than one of simple triumph. Evidence suggests the settlement was occupied only for a short period, perhaps a decade at most. The sagas speak of increasingly violent and fearful encounters with the indigenous peoples the Norse called Skraelings. While no evidence of a battle has been found at Elant's Ox Meadows itself, the combination of a small Norse population facing a potentially hostile and more numerous native population, combined with the immense logistical difficulty of maintaining a supply line from Greenland, likely made the venture unsustainable. The Norse did not fail because they got lost. They ultimately chose to leave because the costs and risks of maintaining a permanent colony thousands of miles from home were simply too great. Elant's Ox Meadows, therefore, stands not as a monument to a failed conquest, but to a brilliant, fleeting moment of contact. It represents the very outer limit of Norse expansion, the farthest edge of the known world for medieval Europe. It proves that the first chapter of European and Native American interaction was written not by Spanish conquistadors, but by Norse traders and explorers, a brief prelude of contact that ended not in conquest, but in a strategic withdrawal. The grassy outlines of those longhouses are a silent testament to human ambition and ingenuity, and a poignant reminder that history is not always about permanent victories, but sometimes about incredible journeys whose echoes reverberate for centuries before being heard again. And just as the discovery of Elant's Ox Meadows rewrote the map of human exploration, our final discovery rewrote the very map of humanity itself, not with stone tools or pottery, but with a single tiny piece of bone and the invisible code hidden within it. The story begins not with a grand expedition, but with a routine excavation in a place already famous for its ancient treasures, the Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. For decades, this site had been a rich source of Neanderthal artifacts and fossils. In 2008, Russian archaeologists were sifting through material from a layer dated to between 50 and 30,000 years ago when they found it a small, unassuming fragment of a finger bone, so insignificant it was simply labeled Denisova 11. It was believed to belong to yet another Neanderthal, but this tiny fossil held a secret so profound that it would require a whole new scientific field to reveal it: paleogenetics. The bone fragment was sent to the pioneering lab of Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany. Pääbo's team was on the cutting edge of extracting and sequencing ancient DNA, a painstaking process where genetic material degraded over millennia is carefully reconstructed. When they sequenced the mitochondrial DNA from this finger bone, they expected to see the familiar genetic signature of a Neanderthal. Instead, the results were baffling. The genetic code was distinctly different. It was something entirely new. This was not a Neanderthal. It wasn't a modern human either. They had stumbled upon the genetic ghost of a completely unknown hominin species, which they named the Denisovans after the cave that had sheltered their remains. This was a revelation that could only have happened in the 21st century. Without the ability to read this ancient genetic code, the finger bone would have remained mislabeled forever, its true significance forever locked away. The subsequent analysis of the nuclear genome was even more staggering. It revealed that the Denisovans were a sister group to the Neanderthals, sharing a common ancestor with them that had split from our own modern human lineage hundreds of thousands of years earlier. They were a distinct branch on the human family tree that we never knew existed, a branch that had evolved and thrived in Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, completely parallel to both Neanderthals in the West and Homo sapiens in Africa. But the real bombshell was what this genetic data revealed about our own past. Woven into the DNA of modern humans, especially indigenous populations in Melanesia, Australia, and parts of Southeast Asia, were distinct Denisovan genetic markers. Just as they had with Neanderthals, our Homo sapiens ancestors had met and interbred with Denisovans as they migrated out of Africa and across Asia. This interbreeding wasn't just a curious footnote, it provided a tangible evolutionary advantage. The Denisovan DNA inherited by modern Tibetans, for example, includes a version of a gene called EPAS1 that helps them thrive at high altitudes by regulating the body's response to low oxygen levels. Similarly, genetic adaptations related to fat metabolism and immune response in other Asian populations have been linked to their Denisovan heritage. Their DNA, it turns out, literally helped us survive and conquer new environments. The discovery of the Denisovans forced a complete and humbling rewrite of the human story. It transformed our understanding from a simple, linear progression, a march from primitive to modern, into a complex, messy, and intertwined braid of multiple human species. For a significant period of prehistory, the Earth was not the sole domain of Homo sapiens. It was a crowded world of at least 4 different human species: us, the Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, the diminutive Homo floresiensis, the hobbits on Flores Island, and the newly discovered Denisovans spread across Asia. We shared this planet, we met, we interacted, and we exchanged more than just ideas. We exchanged genes. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this discovery is its intangibility. To this day, we have almost no physical record of what the Denisovans actually looked like. The entire species is defined by a finger bone, a few teeth, and a tiny skull fragment. Their material culture, the tools they used, the art they might have created, is completely invisible to us, likely indistinguishable from that of Neanderthals or early modern humans in the archaeological record. We know them almost solely through their genetic echo. This makes the Denisovan story a powerful testament to a new era of scientific discovery, where the deepest secrets of the past are no longer buried in the soil alone, but are encoded in the very building blocks of life itself, waiting for us to learn how to read them. And so our journey through these 30 secret discoveries draws to a close. But what a journey it has been! We have unearthed ancient computers in Greek shipwrecks, pulled sacred texts from desert caves, and watched as a single stone slab unlocked the language of the pharaohs. We've stood before a terracotta army guarding its emperor and puzzled over a manuscript that defies all understanding. We have wandered the silent, ash-preserved streets of Pompeii, gazed into the eyes of a 5,000-year-old man from the Alps, and even found the genetic ghost of a lost human species in a tiny piece of bone. Each of these moments began with a question, a chance find, or a stubborn refusal to accept the historical record as complete. And each one, in its own way, tore a page from the history books and demanded that a new one be written. What these stories collectively tell us is that history is not a dusty, closed book sitting on a shelf. It is a dynamic, living puzzle, a magnificent, ever-evolving narrative where a single discovery in a farmer's field or a diver's net can overturn everything we thought we knew. For every fact we hold dear, there might be a Baghdad battery waiting to challenge our assumptions about technology, or a Göbekli Tepe poised to rewrite the entire timeline of human civilization. These discoveries are powerful reminders that the past is not a single, monolithic story told by the winners, but a complex tapestry woven from countless threads, many of which have been deliberately buried, accidentally lost, or simply overlooked. This is why the work of exploration, both in the field and in the lab, is never truly finished. It is a call to remain open-minded, to question the accepted narrative, and to embrace the thrilling possibility of being wrong. The next great discovery might not come from a remote mountain pass. It could be hiding in the DNA of an ancient tooth, in the soil of a local construction site, or in the faded ink of a manuscript waiting to be re-examined with new technology. The map of human history is still being drawn, and there are vast, unexplored territories marked only by the words, "Here be dragons." As we conclude, we want to turn the question over to you. Which of these 30 discoveries captured your imagination most completely? Was it the tragic human story of Ötzi the Iceman, forever preserved in his final moments? The cosmic mystery of the Antikythera Mechanism, a device that shouldn't exist, or perhaps the paradigm-shattering revelation of the Denisovans, a species we know almost solely through a genetic echo? Let us know in the comments below which story sparked your curiosity and made you see the past in a new light. Because that, in the end, is the greatest power of these secret discoveries. They don't just change what we know about history. They change how we feel about it, filling us with a sense of wonder and a relentless drive to keep looking, keep questioning, and keep discovering. The hunt is far from over.